You begin in darkness, soft, blue-grey, the kind that sits just before sunrise, but refuses to commit to actually becoming a sunrise. It's late winter in a small medieval village, the kind of place where houses lean slightly, like tired old people, and the air smells faintly of smoke, wool, and the ongoing argument between mud and frozen earth. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, partly because it's cold, and partly because you've already realized you probably won't make it through this day. Medieval peasants did survive winters like this, but you? You're basically a decorative houseplant with opinions. Your breath puffs out in a thin cloud as you step outside the tiny timber house you've been staying in. You hear the creak of the door behind you, wood protesting another long winter, much like everyone else. The sky above you hangs low and heavy, offering no morning sun, only a dim suggestion that light still exists somewhere else in the world. The villagers say days like this don't really have a beginning. They simply drift into existence, like a slow thought you can't quite finish. You walk toward the central path, if you can call a trampled strip of frozen mud a path, and feel the crunch of frost beneath your boots. The village is small, maybe 20 households clustered together for warmth and community, because isolation in winter was basically nature's way of saying good luck. A major fact of medieval life, peasants in northern Europe often faced months where the sun barely lifted above the horizon, and even when it did, it appeared briefly, weakly, like it had somewhere more important to be. You tug your cloak once more. The wind isn't sharp, but it sneaks under the fabric like it's trying to borrow some warmth it has no intention of returning. You pass by a row of houses with slanted thatched roofs. Some still have last summer's herbs hanging under eaves, frozen stiff, but still giving off a faint scent. One of the odd little cultural details you wouldn't expect. Villagers used to leave bunches of dried juniper tied near the door, not just for smell, but because they believed winter spirits were scared of the plant. Whether or not the spirits appreciated, the gesture is unknown, but the juniper looks nice against the frost. You hear a chicken complaining somewhere behind you. Chickens always complain, but this one sounds like it's offended on principle, which is fair. Winter wasn't kind to anyone. You smell smoke drifting from the nearest chimney. A blend of oak, peat, and whatever burned. You can feel the warmth of it on your face, even at a distance, which is probably your brain inventing comfort out of desperation. Historians still debate whether winter communal living was a practical strategy or simply a collective "we refuse to perish today" pact. Someone calls out a greeting in a voice, roughened by cold and early mornings. You nod back, secretly, hoping that counts as social interaction for the day. People in winter didn't waste much breath on formalities. They needed every bit to keep their ribs from rattling in the cold. You continue on, stepping around the cartwheel ruts from yesterday's firewood trip. They've frozen solid into deep tracks that threaten to twist your ankle if you step wrong. You consider that medieval winter is essentially one long obstacle course designed by someone with a dark sense of humor. As you walk, you pass a low building that looks even more crooked than the others. Yesterday, someone told you it's the grain store, the heart of winter survival. Losing it meant the whole village was in trouble, no pressure or anything. The door is reinforced with iron bands, and the lock is thick, because grain theft was serious business. Not dramatic or romantic like outlaw stories, just the daily reality that food was life. If someone stole grain, it wasn't a crime against property. It was a crime against next week. You step around another frozen puddle, thin ice over dark water, and hear the brittle surface crack under your heel. The sound echoes faintly, crisp and delicate, like a breaking thought. You find yourself thinking about how peasants survived these long, dim winters without the sun. Part of it was preparation. Food stored in pits and lofts, dried herbs, preserved meat, and barrels of ale. And part of it was resilience. That stubborn, hopeful sense that spring always comes, even when winter pretends it never will. A child runs past you, wrapped in so many layers they resemble a small, fast-moving onion. They glance back at you and giggle before disappearing behind a house. You smile at the simplicity of it. Children adapt to the cold faster than adults, perhaps because they're powered by the same energy that fuels hummingbirds and questionable decisions. You pause near the edge of the village, where the fields stretch out into a wide expanse of snow. Last, year's stubble pokes up like brittle teeth. You can almost see the shape of summer here if you squint hard enough. The distant tree line forms a smudged, charcoal-colored border. Beyond it, The world feels even darker and deeper, like the winter woods hold secrets they don't feel obligated to explain. You breathe in again, letting the cold settle in your lungs, like a slow-burning reminder that you are very much alive, even if slightly underqualified for medieval living. Somewhere behind you, a villager chops firewood, each strike ringing out with sharp rhythm. Wood was everything in winter. Warmth, cooking, light, survival. And humorously, no one in the Middle Ages cared that the internet says medieval people didn't bathe, because the firewood alone proves they were washing more often than the jokes imply. You glance back at the village, imagining how it must glow warmly at night when the hearths are full and the candles flicker. Those tiny points of light, pushing against the dark months, that's the real heartbeat of winter survival. And before we go deeper into this world, take a gentle moment. If you're enjoying this quiet walk into the past, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps this sleepy village stay warm. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what's your local time right now? Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You make your way back toward the cluster of houses, following the faint trail of footprints, some human, some chicken, and at least one that looks suspiciously like a dog who gave up halfway and turned around. The morning still hasn't brightened. It feels less like sunrise, and more like someone dimmed the world to winter mode and walked away. You pass a cottage with a tiny window lined in frost, the glass so cold it catches what little light exists and scatters it into dull silver. You don't see anyone inside, but you sense movement, quiet shuffling, the soft thud of something set on a table. People wake up early in winter because daylight is a scarce commodity. Not quite NFT level scarce, but close. You head toward the home where you slept last night, the one with the slightly lopsided chimney that looks like it's leaning in to listen to village gossip. As you approach, the door opens just a crack, letting out a warm ribbon of light. It feels like someone has unrolled a golden carpet just for you. You step inside, and the warmth hits your face so suddenly that your eyes water a little. It's like walking into a hug you didn't know you needed, the kind that smells faintly of wood smoke, stew, and wool that's been drying too close to the fire. The hearth dominates the room, a wide stone structure with soot-darkened walls and a pot suspended from an iron hook. The fire inside glows steady and low, crackling gently like it's making small talk with itself. One major historical fact becomes immediately real. The hearth was the center of medieval domestic life, not just for cooking, but for heat, light, and even limited indoor chores. Without it, you were basically an ice sculpture with a pulse. A woman sits near the fire, stitching a tear in her wool sleeve with the quiet efficiency of someone who's had to repair things her entire life. She nods at you before returning to her work. On the floor nearby, a basket of dried beans waits to be sorted. In winter, tasks like these filled the hours, tiny routines that held the household together when the world outside seemed frozen solid. And here's a strange cultural tidbit most people never hear about. Villagers sometimes warmed stones near the fire, wrapped them in cloth, and tucked them into their beds at night. Medieval hot water bottles minus the water and plus the occasional risk of dropping a hot rock on your toes. You sit on a wooden bench near the hearth, letting your hands rest close to the flames. The warmth travels slowly up your arms, filling the cold spaces in your bones. After a moment, you notice the family's cat curled in the driest, warmest spot, with the smug expression of an employee who hasn't worked since 1347 and doesn't intend to start now. The cat half opens one eye at you, decides you're not interesting enough to acknowledge fully, and goes back to sleep. Fair. You glance around the single-room house. Bundles of herbs hang from the rafters, sage, thyme, and something you don't recognize. The air is thick with their scent, earthy and sharp. The walls are lined with simple wooden shelves, holding pewter cups, clay bowls, and a few objects you can't quite identify. Everything here feels used, necessary, purposeful. Nothing is here just because. Every item had to be made, bartered, scavenged, or inherited. Historians still debate whether families genuinely cherished these objects or simply respected them out of survival. But either way, nothing was wasted. A man enters the house carrying an armful of firewood. His boots are caked with frozen mud, and his beard has collected a small constellation of frost. He kneels by the hearth, adding a few pieces of wood. You watch as he arranges them carefully, almost ritualistically. Firewood is like gold in these months. Burning too much, too fast is the medieval version of leaving all your lights on and wondering why your electric bill hates you. He greets you with a quiet morning, which you interpret as a major display of hospitality, considering it's only barely morning in the technical sense. He gestures for you to move closer to the fire, as though you aren't already 2 inches away from roasting your knees. You shuffle slightly anyway, not wanting to seem ungrateful. Your cloak begins to steam gently, where the frost melts. Nearby, a pot gently simmers over the flames. Whatever is inside smells hearty, simple, and slightly mysterious. Winter stew never had a fixed recipe, just ingredients that happen to exist at the moment. Root, vegetables, maybe some barley, perhaps a bit of dried meat if the family was lucky. The aroma is comforting, even if you don't know exactly what's in it. Think of it as medieval surprise cuisine, very avant-garde, very rustic, potentially very chewy. The man sits on a stool opposite you, warming his hands. He comments on the weather in the way people always do, regardless of century. Cold one today. You resist the urge to respond with sarcasm, because his version of cold involves literal survival, and yours involves turning up your thermostat. A faint sound filters in from outside, something like the muffled thump of an axe, steady and rhythmic. Someone in the village is already chopping wood. The woman glances toward the door, then back to her sewing. "They'll be at it all day," she says. "Fire won't keep itself." You nod, remembering what you passed earlier, the ruts in the ground, the carefully stacked logs, the whole choreography around gathering, managing fuel. Medieval winter wasn't a season. It was a full-time job. You notice a small clay lamp flickering on a shelf nearby, its flame wavering gently as though exhausted. Oil lamps burned precious fuel, so they stayed small and modest. People didn't light up their homes like modern knights. They simply accepted the darkness and learned to work within it. Light was rationed, not taken for granted. You feel a quiet respect settle over you. The woman ties off her thread and inspects her mended sleeve. Satisfied, she stands and drapes it over a wooden peg to finish drying. The fire pops softly, sending a tiny spark upward. The sound is soothing, like a whispered lullaby from the hearth itself. You feel your shoulders relax in a way you didn't expect. As you sit there, soaking in the warmth, you realize something. This room, small, smoky, dim, is the beating heart of winter survival. It's not just the fire. It's the routine, the companionship, the shared tasks, the quiet determination. And maybe, just maybe, the cat's unwavering commitment to comfort. The man reaches for another log, taps it gently against the hearthstones, and adds it to the fire. For a moment, the flame brightens, casting warm light across the room, painting the walls in soft orange glow. You breathe it in. You feel yourself settling into the rhythm of this life. Slow, steady, winter-bound. And then, gently, the story continues. You step back outside after warming yourself, and the cold greets you like an over-enthusiastic acquaintance who doesn't understand personal boundaries. It clings to your cheeks, sneaks into your sleeves, and settles into your bones with the confidence of someone who absolutely is invited to your birthday. You pull your cloak tighter once again. At this point, it's less an article of clothing and more a long-term emotional support system. The light has improved a little since earlier, which is to say the world now looks like it's trying to cosplay daytime, but hasn't studied the role. Everything is washed in a pale bluish tint, the kind of color you only see in medieval winters and in the overly filtered photos people used to post on early Instagram. Frost crunches under your boots as you walk, and each step makes a sound so crisp it feels like you're stepping on tiny, frozen secrets. Your destination, loosely speaking, is anywhere that isn't colder than here. You head toward a small common area at the village center, where a few people have gathered. 2 men are splitting logs, taking turns with steady, practiced swings. You pause to watch. The axe glints briefly in what little daylight exists, rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. One major historical fact becomes clear. Medieval villagers spent an enormous portion of winter days either chopping firewood, hauling firewood, stacking firewood, or thinking about when they would next chop firewood. In a spiritual sense, winter survival was firewood. One of the Men nods at you without stopping his swing. Keep moving if you don't want to freeze, he calls with a half grin. It's half advice, half genuine warning. You nod and continue walking because he's right. Standing still for too long in this climate is basically signing up for a subscription to the Hypothermia monthly newsletter. You pass a group of women gathered around a shallow wooden trough filled with snow. At first, you think they're washing clothes, which feels illegal in this weather. But then you realize they're using the snow itself as a cleaning tool. Here comes your obscure cultural tidbit of the day. In some northern regions, villagers rubbed clothes or linens with clean snow to freshen them when water was scarce or too frozen to use. It wasn't perfect, but it worked well enough, and it was a lot easier than breaking ice with your bare hands. A woman notices your confusion and shrugs. Cold's good for something, she says matter-of-factly. You keep walking and notice a boy leading a goat along the path, the animal's breath steaming in the cold like a miniature dragon. The goat looks unimpressed with everything. You get the sense that goats were born unimpressed and simply continued the trend for the rest of their lives. The boy offers you a shy wave before tugging the goat toward a tiny, half-collapsed shelter where livestock stay during the coldest months. The smell, earthy, warm, unmistakably goat wafts toward you, and for a moment, it's surprisingly comforting. Animals were sources of heat in winter, whether humans admitted it or not. As you walk toward the edge of the village, a woman calls your name well. Your approximate medieval nickname, which sounds like someone sneezed and tried to turn it into a word. You turn to see her bundled in layers of wool that make her look like a very determined cabbage. She beckons you toward her home, where she's hanging small bundles of winter greens, basically the hardiest possible plants that refuse to die, even when the sun decides to take 3 months off. She explains they'll be added to stews later for freshness, which is a strong word for something that tastes mostly like hope and minerals. Inside her house, she shows you a basket of preserved apples, tiny, wrinkled, but miraculously still edible. Apples were a winter treasure, often stored in cool lofts packed in straw. She offers you one. It tastes like concentrated autumn, faintly sweet, with the subtle crunch of a fruit that has survived just as stubbornly as the people who grew it. Not bad for February, she says proudly. You agree wholeheartedly. This apple is basically VIP produce. She ushers you back outside, where a group of villagers is busy clearing snow from a narrow trench leading toward a stream. The stream hasn't fully frozen yet, but patches of ice float on the surface like lazy, drifting thoughts. The villagers break thin sheets of ice with wooden poles, gathering water in buckets. You watch as steam rises from their hands where they splash cold water away because apparently human fingers don't need to feel anything after January. One man laughs as he nearly slips on the bank, catching himself at the last second. Historians still debate whether we're brave or just stubborn, he jokes, shaking water from his boots. You continue your slow wander, noticing details that didn't stand out earlier. A pair of mittens drying on a fence post, a bundle of firewood tied with braided straw rope, a raven perched on a roof beam, tilting its head at you with unsettling intelligence. A stack of ice-covered buckets arranged neatly beside a doorway. Every small object feels like part of an ongoing negotiation with winter. I give you my effort, you give me a few more hours of comfort. You find yourself near the outskirts of the village again. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of distant forest pine, cold bark, and the faint metallic scent of snow, about to fall. The villagers around you barely react. They've smelled enough winters to know what's coming long before the first flakes appear. You, on the other hand, just sense that something is different, like the air is clearing its throat. A woman carrying a basket of wool walks past you, offering a small smile. Storm later, she predicts with casual certainty. You nod politely, even though you couldn't smell a storm if it introduced itself with a business card. You wrap your cloak around yourself again and glance up at the sky, now slightly darker than before. Winter days here don't brighten much, if anything. They simply shift gently between shades of dim. You exhale slowly, watching your breath drift upward. The village continues moving around you, steady and purposeful, like a quiet machine built from routine and determination. You may not be entirely ready for winter life, but somehow, you're still walking, still breathing, still learning from people who endure these dark months with quiet skill, and with that, you continue deeper into the story. You continue your slow wander through the village, noticing how everyone moves with a kind of purposeful calm, the winter version of efficiency. No one rushes, but no one wastes a step either. Everything has intention, as if each person has pre-negotiated their energy with the cold and agreed on strict terms. You, meanwhile, are negotiating with your own fingers, which are steadily losing motivation to remain attached to your hands. You head toward a small, open structure near the center of the village, something between a shed and a communal workspace. The roof is thick with snow, but someone has cleared a path at the entrance. You step inside and find a few villagers weaving baskets. The air smells of dried reeds and cold wood, mingled with the faint warmth of a tiny clay stove glowing in the corner. It's not hot enough to warm the building, but it keeps the reeds pliable, which is more important than your personal comfort. Apparently, one major historical fact strikes you as you watch. Winter was not a season of rest. Peasants spent these months making tools, mending clothing, weaving baskets, carving handles, and preparing for spring. Work never stopped, it simply changed shape, like a responsible adult version of musical chairs where the music is frostbite and the chairs are chores. A younger man pulls a reed through his fingers and begins a new basket, his hands moving with unconscious skill. You ask him how long a basket lasts. He shrugs. Depends on how much you use it. Depends on how much the goat chews it. This feels like a very goat-specific problem. But you nod sagely, as though you also struggle with goat-related wear and tear in your daily life. Nearby, an older woman sorts finished baskets into neat stacks. She explains with visible pride that basket weaving isn't just winter busy work. People use them to store grain, carry firewood, gather kindling, collect herbs, and transport anything from onions to children who refuse to walk. She says this last part with a deeply knowing look. This leads you to your obscure cultural tidbit. Medieval villagers sometimes lined baskets with straw or cloth to turn them into makeshift cradles or travel beds for babies. The combination of creativity and necessity is oddly touching. The clay stove pops softly, drawing your attention. A child sits beside it, warming their hands and flipping a tiny carved toy over and over. Their breath fogs in the air, despite being indoors. A reminder that heating a building wasn't about achieving comfort, it was about preventing catastrophe. Historians still debate whether cold indoor temperatures made people more resilient or simply tested their endurance daily. Either way, medieval villagers walked around with a baseline chill that would send modern folks into full complaint mode. One woman finishes tying off the top of a basket and wipes her, hands on her apron. She glances at you. "You'll want to stay busy too," she says. "If you stand around doing nothing, the cold finds you faster." This sounds like something your fitness app might say, but with higher stakes. She hands you a bundle of reeds. You accept them mostly to avoid looking useless. Your attempt at weaving, however, quickly devolves into a twisted, uncooperative tangle that resembles a very confused spiderweb. The woman kindly pretends not to notice. After a few minutes of trying and failing to create anything that resembles a container, you set the reeds down with the gentle reverence of someone placing a fragile antique back on the shelf. You thank the villagers and step back into the cold, which feels somehow worse after spending time indoors, even if indoors was only 2 degrees warmer. Outside, snowflakes begin to fall slow, soft, and spaced far apart, like they're testing the environment before committing to anything dramatic. The sky above you has sunk into a deeper shade of grey, heavy with unspoken intentions. A woman carrying a bundle of wool passes by and glances upward. "Told you," she says, sounding entirely unsurprised that the weather has obeyed her prediction. You continue walking, your boots making soft impressions in the fresh snow. The sounds of the village soften to wood chopping, low conversation, the creak of carts. All of it becomes muted, wrapped in winter's thick blanket. You pause near a small barn, where the door hangs slightly open. Inside, you see livestock huddled together: sheep, a cow, the ever-judgmental goat. Their breath rises in little clouds. Animals generate warmth simply by existing, and peasants relied on that warmth. A fact you file away with mild astonishment. Outside the barn, a farmer is sorting through a pile of feed, his beard now coated with snowflakes. He nods at you. "Storm will get heavier," he says. "Best gather what you need before dark." You nod, back as if you have any idea what you need. In truth, You're still hoping the cloak alone will solve most of your problems. As you walk toward the well, you see a wooden bucket frozen solid, ice expanding from the rim like a tiny crown. The well rope is stiff, and the bucket someone left beside it has cracked from the cold. "Happens every year," mutters a villager approaching with a replacement. You step aside as they maneuver the new bucket into place. It makes a hollow clunk as it hits the frozen ground. Another reminder. Winter destroys what isn't cared for, and even what is cared for sometimes cracks anyway. You glance down the slope toward the fields, now almost invisible under falling snow. Your footprints from earlier are already softening, filling, disappearing. Winter has a way of erasing the day as quickly as it forms. You pull your cloak closer and watch the snow for a moment. Soft, quiet, patient. It settles on rooftops, fences, carts, hair, shoulders. Villagers continue their tasks without rushing, as though the snow is simply part of their schedule, like an appointment they've lived through so many times it no longer feels surprising. And you, stranger to this season, guest to this world, step deeper into the story, letting winter wrap around you like a slow, steady curtain. You decide that if you're going to survive this medieval winter, you should probably understand how people actually get around in it. Spoiler, very slowly, and usually with a healthy amount of complaining. You tighten your cloak again, because that's basically your main personality trait now, and follow a narrow path that leads away from the village center. The snow falls more steadily now, small flakes drifting down like the sky is shaking out a feather pillow. The path winds between two low fences made of woven branches, the kind that look flimsy but somehow stay standing through storms, goats, and the occasional bored child. You walk carefully, because the snow hides patches of treacherous ice underneath, ready to turn every step into a slapstick performance you did not rehearse for. Ahead of you, a man pushes a small handcart piled with bundles of firewood. The wheels creak, protesting every rotation. When you catch up to him, he nods without slowing down. "Off to the woodland edge," he says, as though this explains everything. And in a way, it does. One major historical fact. Medieval villages relied heavily on nearby woodlands, not just for firewood, but for gathering berries, mushrooms, nuts, bark, and forage for animals. The woods were both pantry and tool shop, though also occasionally haunted, depending on who you asked and how dramatic they were feeling that day. You trail him for a bit, watching how he leans into the cart for momentum. The path dips slightly downward, revealing the village behind you smaller now, half hidden by snowfall, roofs fading into white. The man glances over his shoulder. "Storm's settling in," he mutters. "Dark soon." You resist the urge to ask if it's ever not dark in winter. As the path widens, you pass a cluster of children playing some kind of winter game that involves throwing snow at a tree trunk. Not snowballs, mind you, just handfuls of loose snow they fling with the chaotic energy of puppies who've recently discovered their legs. When one child spots you, they wave enthusiastically and then miss the tree entirely, hitting their friend instead. The friend laughs, shakes off the snow, and retaliates. There's a brief flurry of tiny chaos before they return to their original game. You feel warmer just watching them, which is ironic, given you're still basically a mobile icicle. You continue down the path until you reach a wooden bridge, small, sturdy, covered in a thin layer of ice you wisely avoid stepping on directly. Beneath it, a narrow stream trickles along, edges crusted with ice. A faint gurgling sound echoes up from the water, a reminder that life moves even when frozen months try their best to pause everything. Here comes your obscure cultural tidbit. In some regions, villagers believed that winter streams carried messages from spirits, tiny warnings or blessings depending on how the water sounded. Today, the stream sounds like it's saying, "Don't fall in." You decide you'll take the blessing interpretation. On the far side of the bridge, the path curves past a small field used for root vegetables, now just humps under the snow that look like lumpy ghosts of last season's harvest. A woman stands at the field's edge with a long pole, poking at the snow to check for stored vegetables still buried underground in cold pits. She notices you watching and explains, "Good, keepin' soil stays cold but not too cold. Beets, turnips, they last." She pauses, then adds, "If the mice don't get 'em." The tone suggests that mice are a persistent winter enemy with questionable morals. The snowflakes become bigger as you walk, drifting lazily, almost theatrically. They land on your eyelashes, on your cloak, on that one exposed patch of skin you swore you covered. You blink them away and keep moving, because stopping means freezing, and freezing means becoming a cautionary tale peasants tell their kids about. That outsider who didn't keep walking. You follow the man with the cart until he turns off the main path toward the woodland edge. Tall, dark trees rise ahead, bare branches etched against the grey sky like ink lines on parchment. They sway gently, whispering against one another as the wind picks up. The man pauses and gestures toward the forest. "Good wood in there," he says. "But don't go far. Storms hide paths." His tone suggests this isn't a poetic metaphor, but a very real warning. Historians still debate whether winter woodland travel was truly as dangerous as some chronicles claim, or if medieval storytellers simply had a flair for dramatic imagery. Regardless, you take the hint and decide not to wander into the endless tangle of trees like the opening scene of a cautionary fable. You step aside as the man pushes his cart onward, leaving you at a small rise overlooking part of the village. From here, the houses look snug and softened by snow, smoke curling gently from chimneys. Chickens huddle under a lean-to, livestock shift in their shelters, and villagers move about like slow sparks of color against winter's pale canvas. It's peaceful in a rugged, determined way. You breathe in deeply. The air smells of pine and cold earth and faint wood smoke carried on the wind. Your breath fogs, floats upward, dissolves. Your footsteps have nearly vanished behind you, filled with fresh snow. Winter is an expert editor, erasing everything except what must remain. The wind picks up again, brushing past your hood. You turn back toward the village, knowing the storm will make travel harder soon. Your boots sink deeper as you walk, each step a small effort. But there's something oddly soothing about it, the slow pace, the muted world, the sense that every movement is part of the landscape itself. By the time you reach the first row of houses again, snow clings to your cloak like a decorative pattern. A woman sweeping her doorway gives you a sympathetic look. "Caught in it, eh?" she says. You nod, brushing snow from your shoulders. Happens to all of us. You step closer to the warmth and shelter of the village, snow swirling behind you, and prepare to slip deeper into the rhythm of winter life, one careful, frostbitten step at a time. By the time you shake the last snow from your cloak and step back into the village proper, the light has already begun folding itself away, slipping behind clouds as if embarrassed to have shown up at all. Medieval winter days don't fade gracefully, they simply stop, as though someone extinguished the sky with a damp thumb. You look around, realizing it can't possibly be late afternoon. But here, in the deepest months of winter, late afternoon begins somewhere around you've barely digested breakfast. People move with renewed purpose, knowing darkness will soon settle thick and heavy. A few villagers hurry past you carrying bundles of wood or baskets of winter greens. No one runs, they simply walk faster, the medieval equivalent of putting your phone on low power mode. You head toward the house where you spent the night, spotting a warm flicker of orange in the small window. As you approach, the door opens just enough to let out a ribbon of heat. You step inside quickly, and once again the warmth hits you with such force your eyes water slightly. It's the kind of warmth that feels like stepping into someone else's deeply personal comfort zone. Inside, the family is preparing supper. A pot hangs over the hearth, steam curling lazily upward. The aroma is rich, earthy, and heavy, in a way that suggests the stew is mostly vegetables, possibly barley, and possibly a meat so small in quantity you'd need a magnifying glass to identify it. That's your major historical fact of the evening. Winter meals were simple, hearty, and often repetitive. If you wanted culinary variety in January, you'd have to squint and use your imagination. A young girl sits on a stool grinding something with a mortar and pestle. You lean closer to peek. It's dried rosemary and maybe a pinch of sage. She looks up with the serious concentration of a wizard preparing a spell. "Herbs make the stew taste like something," she announces proudly. You nod with great solemnity, as though acknowledging the deep truth that herbs have been improving bland food since the dawn of human suffering. Across the room, the man of the house is slicing a few remaining root vegetables, turnips, a carrot, and something knobbly that could be a parsnip, or possibly a small, prehistoric creature. He adds them to the pot, stirring slowly with a wooden ladle worn smooth by countless winters. The woman checks the dough she's been kneading near the fire. It's dense, heavy, and looks like it's fighting back slightly. She smiles at you. It'll bake into something, she assures, which you choose to interpret as optimism rather than warning. In the wake corner, the cat has once again claimed the prime real estate near the hearth. It shifts minimally, stretching one paw into the warmest patch of floor stones. The cat's entire personality seems to be, "I was here first," and frankly, you respect that. The household feels alive in a gentle, winter-bound way. Tools hang on wooden pegs, herbs dry overhead, shadows flicker with every movement of the flame. The stew bubbles steadily, making soft, contented sounds, like it knows it's tonight's main event. The fire snaps occasionally, sending up tiny sparks that glow hot and fade quickly. One obscure cultural tidbit surfaces as you sit down near the hearth. Medieval people often believed winter food tasted better when shared, not just because of companionship, but because they thought warmth and good spirits traveled through meals. Even in the harshest cold, they found ways to weave meaning into ordinary moments. The woman guides you to a seat on a low bench and hands you a wooden cup, filled with warm ale, weak, slightly sour, but comforting. You sip it slowly, feeling the warmth spread through your chest like a small sunrise. The girl finishes grinding the herbs and sprinkles them into the pot, stirring as though performing a sacred ritual. The stew releases new scents, earthy, evergreen, faintly sweet. The man clears his throat. "Storm's coming hard by nightfall," he says. "Best stay in. Roads vanish quick." You nod solemnly, as though you had the slightest intention of stepping back outside before April. The woman places a small loaf of dark, dense bread on the table. It looks like something you'd use as a paperweight today, but back then it was prized fuel. She cuts it into wedges, while the man ladles stew into bowls. The aroma fills the room so completely that even the cat opens one eye, just in case generosity is contagious tonight. You receive a bowl, and despite the dim light, it looks inviting: soft root vegetables, a few grains of barley, bits of leaf from the herbs. It smells like warmth and patience, and the collective effort of everyone in this room. You taste it. It's simple, hearty, and surprisingly good. Maybe the herbs really did make it taste like something. As everyone eats, conversation drifts softly around the room, familiar domestic murmurs about firewood, about the coming storm, about whose turn it is tomorrow to check the grain store. The girl tells a short, rambling story about seeing a fox that morning. The man laughs and adds that foxes like to steal shoes left outside. The woman rolls her eyes. "Historians still debate whether he's making that up," she says dryly. You grin into your bowl. Humor survives winter too. The meal ends with the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes after warmth and nourishment. The fire crackles lower, settling into an amber glow. The wind outside nudges at the walls, testing them, reminding everyone that it hasn't finished its work tonight. The woman begins, tidying. The man checks the shutters. The girl yawns. The cat, having contributed nothing, continues being a warm and decorative presence. You sit peacefully, letting the heat seep into your limbs, into your breath, into your thoughts. The storm thickens outside, but in here, everything is slow, grounded, and gently glowing. You realize that winter survival isn't just about tools or food or fire. It's about rhythm, quiet routines, shared spaces, small comforts woven into long nights. And with this warmth still settling deep inside you, the story carries on. Night settles over the village with the quiet authority of someone who does not negotiate. One moment the world is merely dim, the next, darkness arrives fully, confidently, without apology. You sit near the hearth, watching the room soften into warm shadows, while the storm outside becomes a low, constant whisper: snow against wood, wind through eaves, the soft shifting of cold air trying to find a way in. The family moves into their evening routine with the same calm efficiency you've seen all day. The woman adds a final log to the fire, adjusting it until the flames lean toward the pot like they're curious about what's still cooking. The man checks the shutters one last time, giving each wooden bar a firm push. The girl sits cross-legged on the floor, combing her hair with a wooden comb, so wide-toothed it looks like it's been designed specifically to not cause arguments. The house grows quieter, the air thicker with heat, and the earthy scent of stew. You can still feel the warmth radiating from the hearth, crawling up your legs and into your chest. It's the kind of warmth that makes your eyelids feel heavier than they have any right to be. You shift on the bench, and the wood creaks in a friendly, familiar way, as though it has been waiting all evening for you to get comfortable. One major historical fact becomes obvious the longer you sit here. Medieval nights were astonishingly long. In midwinter, darkness could last 14 to 16 hours. Plenty of time for chores, rest, stories, reflection, and trying not to think about how cold it will be when the fire burns low. Artificial light was rare and expensive, so people lived gently inside the limits of the flame. You notice how the family doesn't fight the darkness. They settle into it as naturally as slipping into a blanket. Across the room, the man begins to mend a leather strap with a small bone awl. The sound of the tool pushing through the leather, soft, rhythmic, adds another layer to the room's quiet soundtrack. The woman sorts dried beans into a small bowl, picking out any that look too shriveled or cracked. The girl hums to herself, her voice low and steady, blending with the fire's soft crackling. Then comes your obscure cultural tidbit of the night. Medieval families often practice something called first sleep and second sleep, two separate sleeping periods with an hour or two of quiet wakefulness between them. People used this middle time to talk, pray, mend clothing, stoke the fire, or simply sit and think. Tonight, as you watch this family settle into the evening, it makes perfect sense. The long darkness creates pockets of calm that feel almost sacred. The woman glances your way. "You'll want more wool," she says gently, pulling a thick blanket from a chest. She drapes it over your shoulders with the tender authority of someone who has seen too many stubborn people underestimate winter. The blanket smells faintly of smoke, lanolin, and clean, cold air comfort in textile form. You pull it closer and feel immediately more human. The wind outside picks up, pushing a bit harder at the shutters. Snow taps against the roof, creating a soft percussion. You can almost imagine it as a lullaby performed by the weather itself. The man listens for a moment. "Not the worst storm we've had," he remarks. His tone suggests that the worst ones involve atmospheric chaos you don't want to know about. The cat, sensing the height of evening coziness, gets up, circles twice in a patch of warm stones, then settles down again with an air of profound self-satisfaction. Its purr vibrates softly through the room, like a tiny engine warming the entire household. The girl looks up at you with sleepy eyes. "Tell a story?" she asks her parents. The woman smiles. "You tell one first." The girl launches into a tale about a wandering star that fell into the forest and turned into a fox made of ice. The fox apparently stole not chickens but people's dreams, which feels oddly poetic for someone under 10. You try not to look impressed, but the girl notices anyway and beams proudly. After she finishes, the woman tells a quieter story. Something about a village elder who used to leave food out for winter spirits. Historians still debate whether such traditions were symbolic, superstitious, or simply a way to disguise charitable acts. Either way. Her voice is soft, steady, and deeply soothing. You let the rhythm of her words wash over you like warm wool. When she finishes, the man sets aside his leatherwork and stretches, joints popping faintly. "Bed down soon," he says. "Storm might shake the roof a bit." You're unsure whether he's joking or simply being factual, and frankly, you're not sure which answer is more comforting. Everyone begins preparing for sleep. The woman lays extra straw in the corner where the family sleeps, spreading it into a thick, soft layer that insulates surprisingly well. A large wool blanket is unfurled on top of it. The girl crawls in first, immediately cocooning herself like a small, determined caterpillar. The cat follows, because of course it does. You're directed toward a small spot near the hearth. Warmest place in the house for a guest. Someone places a warm stone wrapped in cloth near your bedding. You suddenly understand the real medieval luxury. Preheated rocks, bathing, might be rare. Spices might be expensive, but having a warm stone on a winter night feels like achieving bonus-level comfort. You settle onto the straw bed, the warmth from the stone seeping into your side. The fire crackles low, a steady heartbeat in the dark. Shadows dance along the wooden beams. The wind hums against the wall, soft now, as though tired from its earlier efforts. You feel the day settling over you, slow, heavy, peaceful. The cold no longer bites, the storm no longer threatens. Everything beyond the walls becomes distant, as if the night itself is holding its breath. You exhale gently, sinking deeper into warmth, into stillness, into winter's long, slow rhythm. And so, the story continues. You wake sometime in the deep middle of the night not because of noise, but because medieval winter silence is so complete it becomes its own kind of sound. The fire has burned down to a bed of glowing embers, pulsing softly like a sleeping heartbeat. The air is cool, but not biting, thanks to the warm stone tucked near your side, still radiating a fading heat. You shift slightly on the straw mattress, listening to the quiet shape of the room. The family sleeps bundled together under the thick wool blanket, their breaths a gentle chorus. The girl is tucked between her parents like a curled-up kitten, and the actual cat has taken up residence near the mother's feet. Fully convinced it is the most important creature in the room, the cat opens one eye when you stir, squints in judgment, then closes it again. You accept this without argument. Outside, the storm has slowed. Snow no longer hammers at the roof, it whispers instead, brushing against the thatch like soft fingertips. The wind sighs around the corners of the house, weaving in and out of the wooden beams with a patient, wandering rhythm. The world beyond the walls feels vast and distant, as though swallowed by the dark. You sit up slightly, adjusting your blanket. Your breath makes a faint cloud in, to the air. This moment, the quiet middle of the night, is something medieval people knew intimately. Here comes your major historical fact. In winter, people often woke naturally between first sleep and second sleep, a normal biphasic pattern before artificial light existed. They used this time for quiet tasks, reflection, or gentle conversation. It wasn't unusual to wake around midnight, sit by the embers, and simply exist in a soft pocket of calm. You move closer to the hearth, careful not to wake anyone. The embers glow red-orange, shadows dancing faintly across the stones. You pick up a long wooden stick and nudge them gently, watching tiny sparks breathe back to life. The warmth touches your face like a familiar friend, subtle but steady. In this stillness, the house feels alive in a different way. The wooden beams creak softly as they adjust to the temperature. The thatch shifts with the wind. Somewhere in the rafters, a drying bunch of herbs rustles faintly, carrying the scent of thyme into the room, and your obscure cultural tidbit emerges. Some villagers believed that certain herbs, especially rosemary and vervain, helped guard against winter spirits when hung above sleeping places. You glance up at the herbs overhead with new appreciation. Whether the superstition works or not, the scent is undeniably calming. You look over at the sleeping family. Even in rest, their faces hold that winter-born resilience, gentle but sturdy, shaped by years of cold seasons and long nights. They don't fear the dark, they simply move with it, like fish navigating a tide. Meanwhile, you're still slightly surprised every time the cat blinks. The man stirs slightly and half opens an eye. "All right there?" he murmurs, voice thick with sleep. You nod, keeping your voice low. "Couldn't sleep." He grunts, softly, a sound that could mean same, good luck, or that's winter for you. After a moment, he adds, "Put another log if you need it." Then he drifts back into easy, practical unconsciousness. You add a small log to the hearth. It catches slowly, the flame creeping along its edge with deliberate patience. The room brightens just a little, enough to paint soft golden outlines on the beams, the pottery, the woven baskets, the folds of blankets. The light makes everything feel warmer, as though the house has exhaled. You settle beside the fire, feeling the heat seep through your blanket. This moment is quiet, but not empty. It feels like the night is watching, not in a threatening way, but in an ancient, thoughtful one. Winter nights always held a certain weight, a certain presence. Even historians still debate whether people genuinely felt the darkness had a mind of its own, or whether long nights simply gave imagination more room to wander. You lean back, letting the warmth wrap around your face and hands. Your thoughts drift gently, nothing sharp, nothing urgent. Just the soft, slow unfurling that happens in deep quiet. You notice how your body relaxes without your permission, how your breathing deepens, how the fire's glow creates a cocoon of faint gold around you. A faint sound outside makes you pause, not a person, not a storm. Just the soft, rhythmic thump of snow sliding off the roof, heavy and muffled, the world rearranging itself while everyone sleeps. You pull the blanket tighter, adjusting your position until your shoulder touches the warm stones of the hearth. The heat radiates through you, lazily. You imagine medieval nights spent exactly like this, half sleeping, half dreaming, wrapped in wool and quiet. Long hours where the world didn't demand anything from you. You close your eyes for a moment. The fire crackles. The cat purrs faintly. The wind hums a wandering tune outside, and in that gentle, deep calm, you slide back towards sleep. Second sleep, medieval style, letting the night carry you softly onward. You wake again, not because the sun has risen, but because the cold has politely tapped you on the shoulder to say, "Hello, just checking in." You open your eyes to a room still coated in darkness, though the embers in the hearth glow faintly as if trying their best, but not quite ready for their morning shift. You inhale the cool air, smelling wood smoke, wool, and the faintest hint of yesterday's stew lingering like a soft memory. The family is still bundled together under their thick blanket, breathing in slow winter rhythm. The girl's hair spills across the wool like a halo of tangled curls. The man snores quietly, just one small, reliable rumble every few seconds. The woman sleeps so still, she seems part of the darkness itself. Even the cat is motionless, curled into a perfect furry comma. You sit up slowly, letting the straw shift beneath you. It rustles softly, a sound that feels louder than it is simply because everything else is so quiet. You glance toward the window, but it's nothing but a dull, deep grey, an early, reluctant suggestion that morning might show up eventually. You pull your cloak around your shoulders and wander toward the hearth. The warm stone from last night is completely cool now, but you keep it near you out of fondness. You kneel by the embers and gently poke them with a stick. They glow brighter, stretching awake like lazy creatures who definitely want 5 more minutes. One major historical fact rises naturally from this moment. Winter mornings in the Middle Ages began before dawn because dawn often refused to make an appearance until extremely late. People didn't wait for sunlight, they trusted their internal clocks, household routines, and the vague encouragement of glowing embers. You set a small log onto the embers, watching as a thin ribbon of smoke curls upward. It catches slowly, flame blooming with deliberate tenderness. Shadows shift across the room, brushing over rafters and woven baskets, and the sleeping forms beside you. Behind you, the man stirs. He rubs his eyes, scratches his beard, and squints toward the light. "Good," he murmurs. Fire's waking. He stands, stretching with the stiff determination of a man who has slept on straw his entire life and refuses to complain about it. "Cold bite this morning," he adds. You nod. Cold bite every morning. You think, but you admire his commitment to understatement. The woman wakes next, rising smoothly and tying her wool cap tighter around her head. She gives you a small smile. "Up early," she says. You shrug. "Slept. Woke. Slept again." She nods knowingly. "Winter sleep," she says, "never stays in one piece." The girl wakes like small children everywhere, with immediate enthusiasm entirely disproportionate to the hour. "Is it morning?" she asks, peering toward the window. The woman answers with practiced vagueness. "Not quite, but soon enough." You admire her ability to bend time with parental confidence. While the family gathers themselves, the woman kneels by the hearth to check the stew pot left soaking overnight. The faint smell of herbs and barley rises up. She adds a handful of dried leaves, maybe thyme, maybe something that simply looks like thyme, and places the pot back on the hook. Breakfast in winter is often last night's dinner, but hotter. Here comes your obscure cultural tidbit. Some medieval villagers believed the first smoke of the morning helped clear away any lingering spirits of the night. The woman waves a bit of rising smoke toward the window, almost automatically. Not quite superstition, not quite habit, but something between the two. You pretend not to notice, because calling attention to it feels like interrupting a private ritual. The fire brightens as the log fully catches, sending warm light across the room. Everyone gravitates toward it instinctively. The girl sits closest, her hands extended toward the heat, palms open like she's communing with a warm, benevolent deity. The man pulls on his boots with the resigned air of someone who knows they will still be cold no matter what. "Have to check the animals," he says. "They won't feed themselves." You consider pointing out that the goat might feed itself on something it's not supposed to, but you keep that thought private. He steps outside, and a sudden wave of cold rushes into the house before the door swings shut. The woman winces. "He'll come back with the storm in his beard," she says. You picture tiny snowflakes decorating his whiskers and realize she means this literally. You help the woman set small wooden cups on the table. They're simple and sturdy, each with tiny imperfections that make them feel alive. The girl helps by placing slices of bread on a cloth. Dense bread, dark bread, bread that has seen things. When you lift a slice, it feels like it could be used as a defensive weapon in a pinch. The man returns, shaking snow from his shoulders. "Wind's changing," he says. "Be a hard day." He says this with the tone of someone announcing that water is wet. Historians still debate whether medieval villagers were genuinely unbothered by weather or were simply too tired for dramatic reactions. But either way, the calm acceptance is impressive. Breakfast begins quietly. The stew simmers, the bread is shared, the fire crackles. The heat feels good on your face. Your body loosens into the moment. The girl talks about seeing a bird outside, insisting it looked directly at her, in a knowing way. The woman suggests gently that maybe it was hoping for crumbs. The girl insists, "No, it definitely knew things." You sip warm broth from your cup. It's simple and earthy, but comfort sits in it like a warm stone. The storm outside whispers against the door, asking politely to come in. No one invites it. You breathe in the warmth, the smoke, the soft beginning of a day that is not yet a day. And, slowly, patiently, the story continues. By the time breakfast settles comfortably in your stomach, the pale grey outside the window has brightened into a slightly less pale grey, which in medieval winter terms means the day has begun. The family prepares to step into the cold again, and you follow, slightly less terrified than the day before, but only slightly. The man opens the door, and a sharp breath of winter air sweeps into the house with all the subtlety of an uninvited relative. The cold clings to your face instantly, reminding you that warmth is a temporary privilege, not a guarantee. You step outside anyway, because participating in survival feels better than watching it from the corner like a timid houseplant. The village looks both familiar and new under the fresh blanket of snow. Roofs sag gently with white weight. The paths have softened into broad curves instead of visible tracks. Footprints from early risers dot the ground, each one crisp and individual, like tiny signatures. A few villagers are already moving, carrying buckets, checking animals, brushing snow from doorways. You realize quickly that winter mornings are not moments of quiet reflection, here they are work. One major historical fact emerges immediately, as you watch a man trudge past carrying a bundle of firewood. Medieval peasants planned their winter tasks around the simple rule of use the daylight while you have it. Daylight was currency. Precious, scarce, not to be wasted on indoor comfort unless absolutely necessary. You follow the man of your host household toward the small barn, your boots sinking into the soft snow. He moves with practiced efficiency, lifting the latch and pushing inside. The livestock greet him with the quiet, expectant sounds of creatures who know breakfast is coming. There's a cow, a few sheep, 2 goats who look like they've been conspiring all morning, and a collection of chickens who appear unhappy about everything. Always. The woman arrives with an armful of dried hay. She scatters it into the troughs while the animals shuffle closer. The cow's breath fogs in front of her face, warm and steady. The man checks the water bucket and shakes his head. A thick crust of ice covers the surface. He knocks the ice loose with the backside of an axe. The sound sharp, cracking, decisive echoes through the barn. Here comes your obscure cultural tidbit. Medieval villagers often kept water in wide wooden buckets, not because they lacked alternatives, but because the shape and material made ice easier to break each morning. You watch as he chips away the frozen edges and scoops out handfuls of ice before refilling the bucket with fresh water. The girl arrives next, carrying a basket of kitchen scraps. The chickens light up like feathered gossipers who just heard their favorite rumor. She tosses bits of yesterday's bread, wilted greens, and a few peels onto the ground. The chickens descend chaotically, flapping, pecking, muttering. Chickens always mutter. You decide this is simply their nature. After the animals are fed, you all step back outside. The cold stings your face again, but you're already adjusting. Moving helps, every chore becomes its own small fire. You walk toward the communal grain store next, following the man as he checks the heavy wooden door. It's reinforced with iron straps and a thick lock, the medieval equivalent of extremely serious security. Grain was survival. Grain was wealth. Grain was the difference between "we'll be fine" and "we don't talk about last winter." He slides the lock open and pushes inside. The air is cool, dry, and filled with the faint smell of stored barley and wheat. Neatly stacked sacks line the walls, carefully labeled with markings. You're struck by the sense of order. Everything here is measured, rationed, tracked with precision. The man counts a few sacks, making soft mental notes. He closes the store again with the solemnity of someone sealing a treasure vault. A woman passing by overhears and says, "Still enough until spring?" Her voice is casual, but her eyes are not. Winter had a way of making food supply everyone's business. The man nods. She relaxes visibly and carries on. You walk deeper into the village with the family, stopping next at the communal well. A few villagers stand around it, lowering buckets slowly into the darkness below. They pull them up, brimming with cold water, steam rising from the open top as it meets the air. One bucket wobbles dangerously, but a quick hand steadies it. Everything is done carefully here, not because people are timid, but because winter punishes mistakes. The woman hands you a small bucket to carry back to the house. You try to lift it. It's heavier than your hopes and dreams combined. She smiles kindly. "You'll get used to it," she says. "You're not so sure." As you walk, the wind picks up slightly, brushing snow from trees and rooftops. The sky above remains stubbornly grey, like it's saving its brightness for some future special occasion. A few villagers call to one another casually, voices muffled by layers of wool and weather. The girl skips ahead, leaving a trail of precise little footprints. You notice each one fills quickly with new snowflakes. You realize that snow here isn't an event, it's a constant participant, a quiet member of the household, a soft, cold roommate who shows no intention of moving out. The man points toward the woodland edge. "Might need more wood by afternoon," he says. The woman nods. You nod because everyone else is nodding, though you're quietly hoping you won't personally be responsible for chopping anything. Historians still debate whether winter routines built community resilience, or simply exhausted everyone equally. But watching the village work together calmly, quietly, deliberately, you understand something important. Winter wasn't survived by strength. It was survived by rhythm, by knowing what had to be done, by doing it even when tired, by sharing the load, by trusting that spring would return, whether it felt like it or not. You walk back toward the house with your small but surprisingly heavy bucket of water. The cold bites gently at your hands, but there's something satisfying in the simple effort. Something grounding. You step inside, breath misting, warmth waiting. And the story walks onward with you. You set the bucket down inside the doorway with all the triumph of someone who has just completed a heroic quest. The woman gives you an approving nod, the medieval equivalent of earning a tiny achievement badge, and you try to pretend your arms aren't trembling from the weight. The fire crackles pleasantly in the hearth, sending out waves of warmth that wrap around you like an embrace you didn't realize you'd missed. The man steps inside behind you, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Wind's turning east," he says, his tone carrying that particular winter gravity you're beginning to recognize. The woman hums in acknowledgement. "Cold day, then." She says it with such calm certainty that you resist the urge to glance outside again, in case the cold is personally offended. You help place the bucket near the hearth so the ice crystals on the rim can melt. The girl sits beside it, dipping a finger into the water and squealing quietly at the chill. The cat, of course, inspects the bucket, decides it lacks personal benefit, and walks away. The family heads into the next set of morning chores. You join in, partly to be helpful, and partly to avoid looking like someone who would unquestionably perish if left alone with a pile of snow for more than 5 minutes. The woman begins sorting a collection of dried goods stored in clay pots, barley, beans, peas, and a handful of herbs. She hands you a pot of dried peas. "Check for stones," she says simply. You look confused. She explains. "Stones hide in peas. Break a tooth if you're not looking." One major historical fact: medieval farmers often gathered and threshed grain or legumes in ways that allowed small stones to slip in. Sorting them out was part of the daily ritual of eating. Medieval dental health was already precarious, no need to introduce tiny geological hazards. You pour the peas onto a wooden tray and begin picking through them carefully. The process is slow, meditative, and strangely calming. The girl watches for a moment, then helps by pointing at each stone with the dramatic flair of a royal inspector. You thank her seriously for every contribution, and she glows with pride. Meanwhile, the man begins mending a crack in a wooden bucket. He heats a small iron tool in the fire, then uses it to soften the pitch he's applying along the seam. The smell of warmed resin rises sharp, earthy, strangely pleasant. He explains that winter is the best time to fix wooden tools, because cold air tightens the grain, making cracks easier to spot. You nod as though you fully understand woodcraft and aren't just admiring the quiet expertise in his hands. Your obscure cultural tidbit emerges naturally as you watch him work. Some villages believed repairing tools in winter carried good luck, because the cold sealed honesty into the materials. Whether or not that's true, it certainly makes the task feel more poetic. When the woman finishes sorting the dried goods, she turns to the hearth to heat water for washing dishes. Not a full wash, nobody wastes that much water in winter, but a careful wipe down using warm water and a cloth. The wooden bowls steam gently as she dries them with practiced speed. If we don't care for the bowls, she explains, they crack before spring. It's a simple statement, but it rings with the truth of winter. Everything must be tended, or winter will claim it. Outside, the wind lifts again, brushing cold air through the small cracks in the door and shutters. The sound of it has a particular note, a high, thin whistle that makes the woman look toward the window. "Storm's still out there," she says softly. The man glances outside. "Not as bad as last year," he notes. "Historians still debate whether that storm had teeth," the woman replies dryly. You smile, appreciating her ability to slip humor into survival. After the dishes, the family prepares for one of the most important morning tasks, tending the fire. The hearth is the house's heart, and winter depends on keeping that heart steady. The man shows you how to bank the coals, pushing ash gently over the glowing embers to help them last longer. You mimic the motion, your hands careful, reverent. It feels strangely ceremonial, like you're participating in an ancient, ongoing choreography passed down through countless winters. "You're learning," the man says approvingly. "Slow, but learning. You take this as a great compliment, considering that yesterday you nearly froze your fingers trying to tie your cloak." The girl then pulls out a small wooden box filled with scraps of cloth, soft bits of wool, linen, and something that might once have been a shirt. "Rag weaving," she announces proudly. She demonstrates by twisting the scraps into long strips, then braiding them into a small mat. The finished product is lumpy but endearing. "Keeps feet warm," she says. You decide she is a genius. You help her twist and braid a few strips, your fingers fumbling at first but eventually finding a rhythm. The process is slower than you expect, but strangely soothing. You feel your mind quiet, your breath steady, your thoughts soften. Winter teaches patience in ways you didn't anticipate. The woman brings over a small pot of warmed water and pours a tiny amount into a wooden basin. Steam rises gently. "Wash your hands," she says. "Cold gets into your skin if you don't care for it." You dip your hands into the warm water, sighing, involuntarily. It feels like a luxury spa treatment, if the spa were located in a world where snow has a personal vendetta against you. After washing, you dry your hands on a woven cloth. The warmth lingers in your fingertips. The girl finishes her rag mat and proudly places it near the hearth, then stands on it to demonstrate its warmth. "See?" she says. You nod seriously. The mat is indeed warm, extremely warm, brilliantly warm. You congratulate her as though she just rewrote the laws of winter. The man pulls on his boots again, preparing for another round of firewood gathering. "Short daylight," he mutters. "Never enough time." He nods to you. "Come along, if you've the strength in your legs." You aren't sure if you do, but you nod anyway. Being invited feels like trust, like acceptance. The girl hands you your cloak. The woman tucks an extra wool scrap into your collar. The cat looks at you like you're making a questionable life decision. You step out into the cold once more, and winter greets you again, waiting patiently as the story continues. The cold greets you like an old acquaintance who always hugs too hard. You inhale sharply as the air hits your lungs with an icy clarity that feels both invigorating and faintly threatening. The man leads the way down the narrow, snow-packed path toward the woodland edge. Your boots sink a little with every step, making soft crunching sounds that vanish quickly beneath new flakes drifting from the sky. The daylight remains hesitant, more a dim silver wash than anything resembling brightness. It gives everything a quiet, dreamlike quality, turning the village into a smudged watercolor painting. The woods ahead look even darker by contrast, their bare branches reaching upward like ink strokes against a pale canvas. The man carries a small axe over his shoulder, its handle worn smooth from years of use. Not far in, he reminds you. Storm might pick up again. You nod, though you're already mentally promising yourself not to wander deeper than your own shadow. You reach the woodland edge, where the trees create a natural boundary, a sort of silent, solemn gate. As you step beyond it, you discover the first major historical fact of this section. Medieval woodlands weren't just forests. They were multi-purpose survival zones. People gathered firewood, hunted small game, collected berries and nuts in warmer seasons, cut branches for tools, and used forest floors for foraging. These woods were both resource and refuge. Today, however, they feel more like a cathedral of cold. Your breath curls into the air, disappearing among the tall, patient trunks. The woman's earlier prediction about storm later echoes faintly in your mind. You help the man gather fallen branches first, the easiest fuel. He shows you how to test each one. Dry. It snaps clean, he explains, holding a twig to his ear before breaking it. It cracks sharply, decisively. Wet. Bends. He hands you another. You try to snap it. It flexes in your hands like a stubborn willow. The man nods. Good. That one stays. You wander a little to collect more fallen wood, careful to stay within sight. The forest is quiet in a way that feels intentional, as if every creature is tucked inside a den somewhere, refusing to participate in today's weather. Snow muffles sound, softening your footsteps into whispers. As you bend to pick up another branch, you spot something curious. A carved wooden charm tied to a low branch, crudely shaped, weather-worn, but unmistakably human-made. When you point it out, the man only shrugs. Old ward. People used to tie charms to trees to keep away spirits. He says it casually, like someone mentioning that their grandparents used to keep coins in jars. And there's your obscure cultural tidbit. Medieval villagers often left small wooden or woven charms in forests as protective symbols, especially in winter when nights were long and imaginations restless. You tuck the charm gently back into place. It sways slightly in the cold breeze, as if acknowledging your respect. The man chops a few small logs from a fallen trunk with efficient strokes of the axe. Each swing sends a sharp, satisfying crack echoing through the woods. The sound feels louder here, bouncing between the trees. You help gather the cut pieces into a pile. They're heavier than you expected, much heavier. You try to lift one onto your shoulder and nearly topple sideways. The man bites back a smile. You'll manage, he says, not unkindly. You manage, but only barely. As the two of you work, the light shifts again, not brighter, but dimmer, deeper, as if the sky is gently lowering its ceiling. Snow begins to fall with more commitment, now larger flakes spinning lazily downward like drifting feathers. The man looks up at the sky with narrowed eyes. Storm's early, he says. Best head back. You nod vigorously, secretly relieved. You each hoist a bundle of wood. Your bundle is modest, but feels like carrying a small, uncooperative goat. The man's bundle is twice the size, and he carries it like it's a bag of feathers. You decide not to take this personally. As you retrace your steps toward the village, the snow deepens around your feet. The cold nips harder at your cheeks, more insistent now. The forest behind you feels like it's quietly closing its doors for the day. When the village roofs come back into view, snow-laden, smoke rising steadily from chimneys, you feel a surprising sense of relief. The man steps ahead, calling toward a group of villagers clearing the path. They greet him with casual nods and quick glances at your bundle, perhaps impressed that you haven't dropped it. The woman meets you near the house, brushing snow from her sleeves. Back just in time, she says. Storm's coming thick. As if on cue, The wind shifts again, swirling snow around your feet in tiny spirals. Inside the house, warmth envelops you instantly. The girl claps when she sees the firewood. More fire. She chirps, as though you've brought home treasure. In a way, you have. As the man stacks the wood neatly near the hearth, you sink onto the bench, rubbing warmth back into your hands. The woman places a cup of warm ale between your palms. The heat seeps through your fingers like gratitude. The man gives you an approving nod. Did well, he says. Forest's not friendly in winter, but you listened. You feel a small swell of pride. You did listen. You did survive. And you did not get adopted by the storm, which is always a plus. The girl presents you with a woven rag mat, small, lumpy, and perfect. For your feet, she says. You place it under your boots. It is warm, miraculously warm. The storm outside intensifies, wind whistling like a cold flute against the shutters. But inside, the fire grows brighter, the room warmer, the air filled once again with the soft rhythm of winter work. You sit back, letting the warmth soak in, feeling the fatigue of cold forest air settle gently into your muscles. You are, somehow, part of this small rhythm now, this winter logic of survival, warmth, and steady, humble effort. And the story stretches quietly forward, waiting for your next step. By the time you've thawed your fingers and your toes have forgiven you for existing, the wind outside has reached a new level of confidence. It presses against the shutters with long, low groans, like a very large creature leaning its weight on the house just to see what happens. Snow hisses across the roof in sweeping waves. Every so often, a stronger gust rattles the door, and the cat lifts its head in mild offense before going back to pretending it invented warmth. The woman glances toward the window, listening with a practiced ear. Storm settled in proper, she says. We'll stay in the rest of the day. She states it with the calm acceptance of someone announcing the sky is blue. No panic, no drama. This is simply winter being winter. The man nods and begins rearranging some tools near the hearth. Plenty to do indoors, he says. And indeed, medieval people never needed the internet to keep busy winter-guaranteed tasks in abundance. You sit near the fire, warming your ankles on the girl's woven mat, which you are now convinced is a work of genius. The woman brings over a basket of wool and a spindle. She picks up a bundle and begins spinning it into yarn with smooth, deliberate motions. The spindle twirls elegantly, catching the firelight as fibers twist into tight, fine thread. One major historical fact spins quietly into place. Winter was prime time for textile work. Families produced the yarn and cloth they'd rely on for clothing, blankets, and repairs during the rest of the year. The girl sits beside her mother, carding wool with two wooden paddles covered in small teeth. She brushes them together, pulling the wool into long, soft tufts. She hands you a set of paddles and gestures for you to try. You attempt it. The wool clings to everything except the paddles. The girl watches with a helpful expression that suggests you are doing your absolute best, and your best is adorable. Eventually, with her guidance, you produce something vaguely resembling a woolen cloud rather than a tangled disaster. Good, she says brightly, and you beam as though you've achieved advanced mastery. The man, meanwhile, begins repairing a wooden stool that has clearly seen better centuries. He removes a loose leg and reinforces the joint with a new peg. The rhythmic tapping of his mallet adds a steady beat to the room. Between the spinning, the tapping, and the wind outside, the house feels like a small orchestra performing an ancient winter symphony. Your obscure cultural tidbit arrives quietly in this moment. Some medieval households believed that making or repairing objects during storms brought luck because it symbolically rebuilt what the weather tried to take away. Whether or not it worked, it gave storm days purpose and a touch of poetry. As you sit by the hearth, the room glows with flickering light. Shadows slide along the beams overhead, shifting with each pop of the fire. The air smells of wool, smoke, and a faint sweetness from dried herbs warming on a shelf. Outside, the wind howls again, but it sounds more distant now, like a stubborn traveler complaining alone in the dark. The man leans back, wiping his hands on his tunic. Storm might last all day, he says. Maybe into tomorrow. The woman nods. Good day to rest, she replies. Good day to mend things. She glances at you. Good day to learn something new. She hands you the spindle. You stare at it like she just asked you to perform heart surgery. But she guides your hands gently, showing you how to twist the wool, how to keep the spindle turning, how to let the fibers feed in slowly until they form a taut, even thread. It's harder than it looks. Much harder, but strangely soothing. You find a rhythm after a few attempts. Awkward, uneven, but functional. The woman smiles. There, she says. You're doing it. The girl watches proudly, as though you've joined an elite textile guild. The cat watches too, but only because the spindle spins, and anything that spins might be worth pouncing on later. A sudden gust of wind hits the shutters hard enough to make the girl jump. The man stands, checking the bar across the door just to be sure. Strong one, he murmurs, but the house is sturdy. He knocks on the wooden beam above him, built to outlast storms. Historians still debate whether medieval homes were truly as weatherproof as people claimed, or whether villagers simply became extremely good at ignoring drafts. But as the storm howls and the house holds steady, you believe him. The fire grows brighter as the woman adds another log. Warmth spreads across the floorstones. The storm can rage all it wants here. In this small, well-tended space, life continues comfortably. The girl brings out a small carved wooden box and opens it with ceremony. Inside are tiny trinkets, carved animals, beads, a feather, a polished stone. Her treasure box. She shows each item to you, explaining where she found it or who gave it to her. Her voice fills the room like gentle bird song. The man begins telling stories, short ones at first, about past winters, about the time a fox stole half a loaf of bread right out of his hand, about the year the snow fell so high it reached the windows, and they had to dig their way out like a sleepy family of bears. The woman adds her own stories, weaving them in like threads in her spinning. Some are funny, some wistful, some spoken with the soft weight of memory. You find yourself sinking deeper into the warmth, the rhythm, the glow. Outside, the wind screams. Inside, the family laughs. The contrast is beautiful. You continue spinning wool, uneven and lumpy but earnest. The woman gently corrects your fingers, praising even your small successes. The girl leans against you, tired but content. The man hums an old tune under his breath, deep and calm. The fire pulses, the storm howls, and the house remains, steady, warm, bright, alive. In this moment, you understand winter survival more clearly than ever. You do not fight the storm, you outlast it, together, and with the storm swirling around the house like a restless spirit, the story continues. By the time the storm finally begins to loosen its grip, the entire world outside has transformed. The wind softens from a roar to a long, tired sigh, like it has exhausted itself scolding the village and is now sulking its way across the countryside. The snow no longer lashes at the shutters. Instead, it drifts lazily past them, swirling in gentle eddies like it's reconsidering its life choices. The man cracks open the door, just enough to peek outside. Cold air rushes in sharp, clean, full of that fresh snow smell that somehow manages to be both comforting and ominous. He squints into the brightness. Deep, he says simply. You get the impression that deep is the highest tier in the scale of winter assessments. And he has. I selected it without hesitation. The woman moves beside him and looks out as well. Drifts nearly to the fence, she murmurs. The girl darts between their legs to try and see, but the adults block most of the view, sparing her from the shock of knowing just how high winter can pile itself when given one night and a lot of confidence. You approach the doorway and inhale the cold air so crisp it feels like it could shatter if you breathed wrong. Outside, the village looks buried under a soft, glowing blanket. Roofs curve with heavy white crowns, fences are half submerged, paths no longer visible. The landscape has smoothed itself into one continuous, pristine sheet, as though someone created a perfect winter model and forgot to add all the smudges of human life. One major historical fact slips naturally into your mind. Medieval winters often immobilized entire regions for days. Roads disappeared, trade halted. Travel became nearly impossible unless you genuinely wanted to risk becoming a permanent snow sculpture. Villages survived because they were self-sustaining, Everyone relied on everyone else. Winter was a test of preparation, cooperation, and the quiet determination you've been witnessing every hour you've been here. The man steps outside first, pushing snow aside with his boot. The layer is nearly up to his shins. You imagine trying to walk through it and picture yourself sinking dramatically, cloak and dignity disappearing at the same time. The man scans the roofs, the chimneys, the frozen bundles of firewood stacked against houses. "We'll need to clear paths," he says. The woman nods. "And check on the neighbors." Another nod from the man. You're beginning to recognize the winter communication style. Brief, to the point, no energy wasted on elaborate sentences when the cold is actively charging rent in your bones. The girl, wrapped in more layers than you've ever seen on a living human, bounces excitedly. "Snow Hill!" she squeaks. Her enthusiasm could melt permafrost. The man ruffles her hair. "Work first," he reminds gently. "Hill later." You step out onto the porch, feeling the snow collapse under your boots with a soft whomp. The cold immediately bites at your face in that very personal way winter excels at. The air sparkles faintly with drifting flakes, catching the weak daylight like tiny flakes of silver. The whole world seems brighter not because of the sun, which is still hiding behind its habitual cloud curtain, but because snow reflects light upward, illuminating everything from below. The man hands you a wooden shovel. It feels sturdy, slightly heavy, and absolutely judging your upper body strength. "We'll clear the path to the well first," he says. You nod, holding the shovel like a knight preparing for an honorable duel, except your opponent is a semi-solid approximation of frozen water. Together, you carve a narrow trench through the snow. Each shovelful is heavier than it looks. The snow clumps together in dense, icy piles. The man works ahead, pushing long strokes, moving with a practiced rhythm. You follow behind, smoothing edges, trying to pretend you're extremely useful and not simply a well-meaning liability. Across the way, another household emerges. A woman and two boys begin clearing snow from their roof with long wooden poles, gently knocking loose the heavy buildup. Snow tumbles down in thick cascades. The boys whoop with delight every time a chunk falls, especially loudly. The woman pretends not to smile, but she absolutely does. Your obscure cultural tidbit appears the moment you look up. Some medieval villagers believed the snow on their roofs protected them during storms by keeping the cold out. This wasn't entirely superstition. Snow is actually an excellent insulator. So, families removed only what could collapse the roof and left the rest in place like a temporary winter blanket. You hear a call from down the path. The elderly woman, who lives alone in a small cottage, waves with a mittened hand. The man you're with nods to you. "We'll check on her next," he says. This is the winter routine check on the vulnerable. Make sure no one's fire went out. Ensure everyone's water bucket hasn't frozen into a single huge medieval popsicle. The girl skips along beside you, her tiny boots making perfect little holes in the snow. "It's beautiful," she says, eyes squinting in the brightness. You agree wholeheartedly, though the beauty has a sharp edge, like something delicate that could turn dangerous if underestimated. As you approach the older woman's cottage, you notice her shoveling snow off the step with surprising vigor. "Ah," she says when she sees you. "Storm left us a gift." She gestures broadly to the snowdrifts. "Won't fit in my pantry, though." Her humor is dry as kindling. She invites you inside for a moment of warmth. Her cottage smells of smoked fish and pine, resin. A single pot hangs over the fire, and she offers each of you a sip of something hot and herbal. It tastes like mint, dirt, and maybe wisdom. You don't question it. She talks about winters past, how one year the snow piled so high, the village dog disappeared entirely. Don't worry. It reappeared with a sausage stolen from someone's kitchen. How the river froze so solid people used it as a temporary path. How the sky once turned the deepest shade of blue she'd ever seen. The kind of color that makes you forget your own name for a moment. Historians still debate whether her memory of the blue winter is exaggerated or entirely metaphorical. But listening to her voice, steady, warm, threaded with decades, you decide it might be true. You leave her house and continue your path-clearing duties. The snow glitters in the air like the world is exhaling tiny stars. The man shows you how to pack the snow on the sides of the path to build firm little walls, making it easier to walk later. You copy him, your movements slow but earnest. Villagers greet one another as they work. Some share tools, some share jokes, some share the mutual, knowing sighs of people who have lived through enough winters to treat storms like house guests who always overstay their welcome. By midday, though, the sky still looks like early morning. You've made enough progress to return home for warmth. Inside, the fire's glow feels like stepping into another world. The woman sets a pot of stew back on the hearth, reheating it with the ease of someone who has mastered winter cuisine. The girl places your snow-covered boots near the fire to dry. The cat reclaims your spot on the mat immediately and unapologetically. You sit, breath thawing, muscles settling, the warmth climbing back into your bones. The storm may have reshaped the village, but inside this small, steady home, life continues warm, bright, and patiently resilient. And with that warmth wrapping around you again, the story continues. The moment you step back inside, the warmth from the hearth hits you with such gentle force that it borders on emotional. Your shoulders drop, your breath deepens. The cold begins to retreat from your fingers and toes, like it's been politely escorted out by the fire itself. The girl proudly retrieves your boots from beside the hearth and announces, "They'll steam soon," as though this is an exciting seasonal event. And honestly, it kind of is. The woman stirs the pot hanging above the fire. The scent of simmering stew fills the room, earthy, savory, and deeply comforting. Barley, root vegetables, a hint of herbs, maybe even a sliver of dried meat, each ingredient doing its best impression of warmth. You sit near the hearth as she ladles the stew into wooden bowls, the steam swirling upward in soft spirals that glow briefly in the firelight. One major historical fact makes itself known the moment you take the bowl. Medieval winter meals weren't meant to dazzle. They were built for endurance, thick, nourishing, fuel for cold days and colder nights. Stews were the backbone of winter survival, simple ingredients transformed into something greater by time, heat, and the collective patience of everyone waiting to eat. You take your first spoonful. It's hot, almost too hot, but the warmth spreads through your chest like slow sunlight. The girl holds her bowl with mittened hands because she refuses to take off her mittens indoors today, and carefully blows on each spoonful before eating. The cat sits nearby, tail thumping the floor in hope, clearly believing that if it stares at you long enough, stew will be spontaneously donated. The man eats with quiet enthusiasm, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Storm left us plenty of work," he says between bites, "but good stew helps." The woman nods. Warm stomach, warm hands, warm thoughts. You smile at that. There's truth in it. This meal is the anchor of the day, the center of warmth, around which everything else circulates. After lunch, the family shifts into their afternoon winter tasks, which turn out to be an organized combination of small chores, repairs, and occasional bursts of storytelling. The woman clears the table, careful not to waste so much as a crumb. The girl volunteers to help wash the bowls well, wash in the medieval sense, meaning warm water, a cloth, and a determination to convince the bowls they're clean. The man returns to the wooden bucket he was repairing earlier, testing the seam with a practiced thumb. Satisfied, he sets it aside and retrieves another tool that needs attention. A small knife with a dull edge. He sharpens it using a smooth stone. The scraping sounds soft and repetitive, like a winter lullaby made from steel and patience. Your obscure cultural tidbit enters naturally here. Medieval households often used winter afternoons for quiet work tasks that required focus rather than strength. Sharpening tools, mending clothes, spinning yarn, patching leather, tightening loose thatch, fixing small wooden items, not because these chores were relaxing, though some were, but because winter rewarded steadiness over speed. The woman brings over a wooden frame holding a partly woven fabric panel. She sits beside you and pats the bench. "Help hold this," she says. You steady the frame while she weaves narrow strips of wool through it, creating a thick, warm cloth for winter use. Watching her hands quick, precise, unhurried, you realize how much of winter survival depends on ritual, on repeated motions perfected over years, on the understanding that every small effort matters. The girl soon joins you, proudly showing the rag mat she made earlier. "This one's for the cat," she announces. The cat hears this, walks over, sniffs it, and sits on it immediately, as if fulfilling a cosmic obligation. The girl beams with triumph. Outside, the snow continues to fall, but more gently, now soft flakes drifting down the way. Dust settles on old books. The wind has quieted into a low hum. White light reflects through the tiny window, bright enough to illuminate the room, but soft enough to feel filtered through several layers of winter. The man looks up. "We'll need to fetch more snow later," he says. You pause mid-thought. "More snow?" He sees your confusion and clarifies. "For water." Of course. Snow melted into water. Practical. Necessary. Slightly demoralizing. He shrugs. Better clean snow than frozen well. You help gather a bucket of fresh snow from just outside the door. The cold nips at your fingers again, but you're starting to understand the rhythm. Brief task. Quick return. Warm reward. The woman sets the bucket near the hearth, where it immediately begins melting into clear water. The afternoon settles into a comfortable silence. The kind of silence that feels lived in, shaped by routine, deepened by weather. The girl hums, softly as she braids scraps of yarn into a little rope. The cat kneads its new mat with regal satisfaction. The man sharpens the last of his tools. The woman continues weaving. Historians still debate whether winter gave medieval people more rest than summer, or simply different kinds of work. But watching this family, you sense the answer lies somewhere in between. Winter slowed the body, but not the mind. It paused the fields, but not the hands. It quieted the world, but deepened the home. After a while, the man breaks the calm. "Day's short," he says. "Best take advantage while there's light." He gestures to you. "Come, I'll show you something." You follow him outside. The storm has softened into a steady snowfall, and the sky is brighter now, though still wrapped in clouds. He leads you behind the house to a small mound covered by a thick layer of snow. "This," he says, brushing away the top layer, revealing a wooden lid, "is our winter pit." He lifts the lid to show a shallow storage space filled with straw and a few hardy vegetables, turnips, parsnips, one carrot that looks like it's seen too much of life. "These keep better underground," he explains. "Colder, but not freezing." You nod, impressed. It's a simple system, but brilliant nature's refrigerator, built with practicality and a touch of winter cunning. He covers the pit again and pats the snow back into place. "Remember where it is," he advises. "Easy to lose track." You look around at the endless white landscape and think, yes, losing track would be extraordinarily easy. Winter flattens everything into equal, undisturbed silence. As you return inside, the warmth greets you again, like a patient friend. The room glows softly, the fire burning steadily, the family moving through the space with the instinct of people who know winter like an old song. The day continues, slow and warm and quietly purposeful, and with the snow drifting softly outside, the story goes on. By the time you settle back inside, the daylight outside has reached its most valiant effort, an anemic, silvery wash that counts as afternoon, only because everyone has collectively agreed to call it that. It filters through the tiny window, in a way that makes the room feel softer, almost dreamlike. The fire pops quietly, as if discussing the weather with the stew pot. The girl sits cross-legged on the floor, braiding leftover yarn into a colourful rope. The cat watches her work with deep suspicion, clearly evaluating whether this rope will be used to deny it attention later. The woman hums under her breath while organising the woven cloth she finished earlier. The man rubs his hands together, slips on his boots again, and gives you a nod that unmistakably means, "It's time for more chores." You brace yourself. "We'll check the roofs," he says, "and the smoke holes." His voice carries a practical tone that suggests this is a routine, not an emergency. 1. The major historical fact steps up politely here. Medieval homes often had openings in the roof or walls, crude chimneys, vents, or smoke holes that required regular inspection during snow to prevent blockage. A blocked vent meant smoke buildup, and smoke buildup meant everyone waking up feeling like they'd slept inside a disgruntled dragon. You follow him outside as the girl waves enthusiastically from the doorway, yelling, "Don't fall," which is sweet, supportive, and slightly terrifying. The world is astonishingly quiet. Snow absorbs sound with almost greedy eagerness, swallowing footsteps, breath, even distant voices. The sky hangs low, pale as chilled milk. Smoke from chimneys rises in faint, wavering trails, struggling to find the wind. The man leads you to a neighbour's cottage first. He taps the roof with a long wooden pole, knocking loose a thick sheet of snow. It slides off in a heavy whump that sends a small cloud of powder into the air. Too much weight, he explains. If it builds up too long, roof sags. You nod, grateful the roof hasn't sagged while you were eating stew. He hands you the long pole. Try. You stare at it. The pole is tall. You are not as tall. He gestures encouragingly. You attempt to knock down a smaller drift. The pole wobbles. You stab the air. The snow drifts deteriorate at a pace that can only be described as reluctant. When a small clump finally falls, the man gives you a nod of approval that feels disproportionately rewarding. Good, he says. Keep balance. Your obscure cultural tidbit appears like a shy squirrel. In some villages, people believed knocking snow from roofs during storms angered winter spirits, so they did it quietly or in pairs. Others said it pleased the spirits because it showed respect for the home. Like most medieval folk traditions, it depended on who you asked and whether they'd had breakfast yet. You move to another roof. This time your aim is better, though. You still manage to fling a small shower of snow directly onto your own boots. The man pretends not to laugh. You pretend not to notice. Next, you check on the smoke holes. Many medieval homes simply had a gap in the roof where smoke escaped. Snow loves filling those gaps. The man lifts a small ladder and checks each one with practiced ease. A few need clearing. One is partially iced over. He knocks it gently with a wooden mallet. A thin plate of ice slides off with a soft crackle. Instantly, a thicker column of smoke billows upward from inside the house, a good sign. Ventilation restored. Nobody will be lightly smoked like winter ham tonight. You step back, admiring the simple but essential task. He glances your way. Cold teaches you to pay attention, he says. Teaches you to notice small things. You nod, realizing there's a quiet wisdom behind every winter action. Roofs, vents, water, fire. Everything is connected. Everything matters. As you walk back toward your host, family's house, you hear a hollow thunk behind you. Turning, you see the man has thrown a small snowball at you. He stands there, expressionlessly confident, as if this was always going to happen. You blink. Another snowball forms in his gloved hand. You scoop up snow on instinct and dramatically lob a misshapen snowball back at him. It falls short by a heroic 2 meters. He smirks. Good effort. A second snowball lands squarely near your foot. You retaliate again. Your snowball actually travels farther this time. He raises an eyebrow, impressed. The two of you exchange a few more volleys. You lose. Majestically. But you do not go down without enthusiasm, which the man clearly respects. By the time you return indoors, your cloak is dusted in snow, your face is cold, and your dignity is slightly dented, but your spirit is brighter. The girl greets you as though you've just won a winter tournament. You're cold, she announces, grabbing your arm and tugging you toward the fire. The woman hands you a warm cup herbal tea made from dried mint and something that tastes faintly like pine. It warms your mouth and chest instantly. The man sits down, brushing snow from his beard. Storm will pass by tomorrow, he says. Skies lightening. The woman nods, stirring the pot again. Good, she says. We'll need to check the stores. And the well. The girl pulls you toward the window, pointing outside. Look, she whispers. Snow still falls, but slower now, flakes drifting gently, like tired dancers drifting toward rest. The fire crackles behind you. The warmth fills your bones. The room hums with quiet domestic sounds, spinning wool, clinking tools. The cat grooming itself indignantly after accidentally stepping in snow. Historians still debate whether medieval winters were truly harsher than today's, or if life simply demanded more awareness of every shift in the season. But experiencing it firsthand, even just one afternoon, you understand, winter wasn't an obstacle. It was a teacher. Slow lessons, simple truths, small routines that kept life steady when the world outside vanished in white. You sit back, sipping your warm drink, while the faint afternoon light dims gently into evening. And the story continues. As the pale afternoon light quietly folds itself into an even paler evening, the family transitions into another winter ritual. The ceremonial checking of the food stores. It's not dramatic. No one delivers a stirring speech about rations or survival. Instead, it's done with the same calm seriousness as everything else. Steady movements, thoughtful glances, and a collective understanding that winter rewards attention but punishes assumptions. The woman pulls on her cloak and gestures for you to follow. The man joins, carrying a small lantern whose wick has been trimmed to a delicate glow. The girl bounces behind you with the excited energy of someone who loves counting things, specifically if those things are edible. The cat does not follow. The cat refuses to participate in tasks that do not involve warm laps. Outside, the sky has settled into a silvery dusk. Snow glows faintly beneath your feet, reflecting what little light remains: moonlight, starlight, lantern light, and, perhaps, the faint glow of winter spirits, if you believe the village legends. The air is crisp, still, and quiet enough that your breath sounds loud when it leaves your mouth. You walk toward the grain store, a squat wooden building secured with thick iron fittings. The man unlocks it with a heavy iron key, and the door creaks open slowly, releasing a wave of cold air smelling faintly of earth, straw, and last summer's sun trapped inside grain husks. Your breath curls into the darkness. The woman lifts the lantern high, and the soft golden light spills across stacked sacks, clay jars, baskets lined with straw, and bundles of dried herbs tied with woolen string. It feels like stepping into a vault, not of gold or jewels, but of calories, warmth, and life. One major historical fact stands right in front of you. Food security in winter wasn't an abstract concept. It was the backbone of survival. These stores represented months of labor, planning, and luck. A single, spoiled sack, or rodent infestation could alter the course of a season. The man begins inspecting the grain, pressing his hand into one of the sacks. The grains shift beneath his palm with a soft, whispery sound. He nods. "Dry," he says. "Good." The girl records this verdict with solemn importance, though she's actually drawing shapes in the frost. The woman moves to a wooden shelf, holding clay pots sealed with beeswax. She lifts one gently, checking for cracks or signs of cold damage. "Beans are keeping," she murmurs. Her fingers glide across the cool clay with quiet reverence. You help by lifting the lighter jars and placing them on the floor for inspection. She taps one gently. "Hear that?" she asks. You listen. A faint hollow sound echoes. "Still dry," she explains. "Still safe." Your obscure cultural tidbit slips in as naturally as if it walked through the door with you. Some medieval households use special winter charms or symbols carved onto grain sacks, little marks, meant to bless the food, guard it from spoilage, or bring good fortune. You notice a faint mark, two intersecting lines drawn in charcoal on one of the sacks. When you point it out, the woman smiles. "Old habit," she says. "Doesn't hurt." The girl wanders to the root vegetable baskets, turnips, parsnips, and the one heroic carrot you saw earlier. She lifts each one with dramatic flair, announcing, "Still good." Or, in the case of one shriveled specimen, probably not. The man takes the shriveled root, examines it, and tosses it into a small discard pile. "We'll give that to the goats," he decides. Apparently the goats enjoy questionable produce. Next, you open a wooden chest containing dried herbs, mushrooms, and berries. The earthy scent rises immediately, an aromatic reminder of warmer seasons. The woman checks each bundle, ensuring none have grown mold or drawn moisture. "These keep us healthy through winter," she says simply. "Herbs help when the cold gets into the bones." The room feels small but sacred in its own way. Quiet, organized, thoughtfully prepared. A winter temple built from grain, roots, and patience. The man lifts the lantern higher, casting shadows across the beams. "Plenty left," he says. "We'll make it to spring fine." His voice carries no triumph, no pride, only steady relief. It's a sentence that means more than it sounds like. It means survival, stability, safety. Historians still debate whether medieval people feared winter as intensely as later writers suggested, or whether their lives were simply shaped around its realities. Watching this family, you sense something deeper. Winter wasn't feared. It was respected, managed, understood. A powerful neighbor, unpredictable but familiar. When everything is checked and accounted for, the woman reseals the door and the man locks it again. The lantern light flickers across the iron fittings, making them gleam coldly. The girl skips ahead on the path back, leaving a string of tiny footprints shaped like energetic punctuation. Inside the house, the sudden warmth feels like falling gently into soft wool. The fire glows bright, crackling in welcome. The cat looks up, stretches, and returns to its nap in the most arrogantly comfortable position imaginable. The woman places a small handful of dried berries in a bowl, a winter treat, and hands you a few. They're tart, chewy, and surprisingly sweet. The girl munches hers with exaggerated enjoyment. "These taste like summer," she says, and she's right. You sit down on the bench, feeling the day's work settle into your muscles, not painfully, but solidly, like you've participated in something meaningful and necessary. The man sets his lantern aside and begins patching a crack in a wooden spoon. The woman starts preparing evening bread. The girl sits beside you, humming softly while organizing her small treasures into neat rows. Outside, night wraps itself over the Twen. The village again slow, deep, and snow-filled. Inside, the fire burns warm. The home hums with quiet purpose, and the pantry holds stories of seasons past and promises of spring. You take a breath, letting the warmth sink into your bones. And the story moves gently into the long winter evening. Evening settles in with that familiar winter softness, the kind that dims the world without making it feel smaller. The fire glows brighter now, as if pleased with itself for surviving another day. The room hums with warmth and quiet motion. The girl sorts her treasures again for no real reason except that it brings her joy. The cat sprawls near the hearth like it pays rent, and the woman begins preparing something that feels almost ceremonial. Bread, not the fluffy, modern kind that rises dramatically and makes you think about bakeries and childhood. No, the medieval winter loaf is dense, dark, and honest. A bread that does not lie about its ingredients or its intentions. The woman rolls up her sleeves, revealing strong forearms from years of kneading dough into shapes that defy famine. She reaches for a wooden bowl, filled with coarse flour, barley, rye, maybe a little wheat if fortune has been kind. She adds warm water from the melting snow bucket, then a pinch of salt, then begins mixing with slow, confident movements. It is not fast, it is not flashy, but it is absolutely hypnotic. You watch as the dough forms heavy, lumpy, determined. One major historical fact rises from the bowl like steam. Bread was the backbone of medieval diets. In winter, especially, each loaf represented not just nourishment, but planning, labor, and luck. A household's flour supply was a mathematical promise. If we measure correctly, if the grain store stays dry, if the storms don't last too long, we will eat. The girl climbs onto a stool beside her mother and begins sprinkling a few crushed dried berries into the dough. "For taste," she declares proudly. You glance. At the bowl there are maybe 4 berries total, but she places them with the care of someone embedding gemstones into a crown. The woman smiles and lets her help knead. Their hands large and small, experienced and enthusiastic, press into the dough together. The rhythm is steady. Fold, press, turn. Fold, press, turn. A winter heartbeat. Your obscure cultural tidbit arrives here quietly, wrapped in the smell of warm grain. Medieval households often scratch simple symbols, crosses, circles, family marks onto the top of loaves before baking. Sometimes for decoration, sometimes for identification, sometimes as a blessing. It was common for a loaf to have a story baked into its crust. The woman smooths the dough into a round shape. With her thumb, she presses a tiny mark into the center, a simple spiral shape. "My mother used that mark," she explains. "Said it kept the bread from burning. Or maybe it just made it look pretty." She shrugs. Either way, it feels wrong. Without it. The man, finished with his spoon repair, approaches the hearth. He clears a small area in the coals and places a flat stone there. The woman sets the dough onto the warmed stone, covers it with an iron pot, and pushes embers around the edges. The smell changes almost instantly, earthy, warm, comforting. The cat sniffs the air and lifts its head as though considering whether bread is worth caring about. It isn't, according to the cat. The girl sits beside the hearth, watching the pot like it will suddenly give birth to magic. "It smells good already," she whispers. It does. The scent spreads through the room like a soft memory, like the warmth of hands held between mittens on a cold day. While the bread bakes, the family settles into another evening activity. Stories. Winter is full of them old tales, family histories, rumors, dreams, superstitions, jokes, delivered with dry winter humor. The man begins with a story about the harsh winter of his childhood. "Snow so deep," he says. "We had to dig tunnels between houses." You laugh. The girl gasps. The woman shakes her head fondly. "He's exaggerating," she says. "It was only up to the windows." The man grins. "Fog of memory," he claims. Historians still debate. The girl tells a story next about a magical creature that lived in the winter woods and left tiny footprints shaped like stars. She insists she once saw them. The man raises an eyebrow. The woman plays along. Maybe it visits those who behave. The girl looks instantly guilty, which suggests she may have questionable snowball-related crimes in her recent history. Your turn comes next. The family looks at you expectantly. You realize they're waiting, curious, open, gently excited to hear one of your stories. You tell them a simple one, something from your own life but softened, made sleepier, made more timeless. They listen with real attention. The girl's eyes widen at the right moments. The man nods thoughtfully. The woman smiles softly, as though storing your story in the same mental shelf as her herbs. The pot over the bread hisses faintly, not a warning, just a sigh. The woman lifts it carefully, revealing a small, round loaf with a deep brown crust. Steam rises from its surface. The spiral mark remains faintly visible, baked into the surface like a memory. She taps the edge. "Done," she says. She lets it cool just long enough to avoid chaos, then slices it with a worn knife. The crust crackles. The inside is dense and soft, with tiny flecks of berry scattered like quiet surprises. She gives you a slice. It is the warmest food you have ever held. You take a bite. It tastes like earth and grain and the faint sweetness of the berries. It tastes like effort and patience and old traditions. It tastes, strangely, like safety, bread and stew, warmth and family, stories and snow. Winter's entire economy runs on these simple exchanges. Outside, darkness thickens. Snow drifts silently. The world feels held. Inside, the home glows with heat and kindness. And wrapped in the warmth of bread and fire, the story deepens gently into the night. The bread has filled the house with a warmth that feels less like heat and more like a soft, steady reassurance. You sit on the bench with your slice, savoring each dense, comforting bite while the fire hums quietly in the hearth. Shadows move gently on the walls, long, stretched shapes that sway whenever the flames pop. The girl sits at your feet, gnawing on her own slice of bread, with the focus of someone engaged in important work. The cat observes this process from a respectful distance, waiting for crumbs to fall like blessings. Outside, the storm has completely quieted. The silence feels enormous, like someone has wrapped the entire world in thick wool. The man opens the door just slightly to check the weather. A pale wash of moonlight spills across the snow, bright enough that the entire village gleams, faintly. He steps outside, looks up, and calls softly, "Clear sky." The girl scrambles to the door. The woman sets down her weaving and joins. You follow, cloak pulled tight as you step into the doorway, letting the cold brush your cheeks. The sky above is a softened blur of grey and silver, the clouds clearing in patches that reveal glimpses of stars, weak little glimmers that look like they're trying to warm themselves by the moon. The snow reflects the sky's light so brightly you can almost see individual flakes resting atop the drifts. The air is so still you can hear things you normally wouldn't. The creak of a distant tree limb, the soft drip of melting icicles, the slow shift of snow settling under its own weight. And then you realize something. You can hear the snow, very faintly. A soft, whispering sound. Not from falling flakes, but from the tiny cracks forming as the snowpack cools and adjusts under the moonlight. A delicate murmur. A brittle little sigh. The girl's eyes widen. "It's talking," she whispers. The woman chuckles gently. "Snow settles after a storm," she explains. "Makes tiny sounds." But she says it softly, almost reverently, because in winter, practical knowledge and quiet wonder often live side by side. One major historical fact settles in the air around you like one of the drifting flakes. Medieval people often listened closely to nature at night, not because of superstition, but because the natural world was their guide. The loudness of wind, the pitch of ice cracking, the way snowfalls whispered or groaned, these sounds were clues, warnings, reassurance. Winter didn't just happen around them. It spoke to them. You step outside a little farther, boots sinking gently into the untouched snow. It glows faintly under the rising moon. You hold your breath and listen. There it is again. A tiny shh, like two dry leaves brushing. Then a soft CRK, like distant parchment folding. It really does sound like whispers. Your obscure cultural tidbit arrives here. Some medieval villagers believed that on nights like this, clear skies after heavy storms, the snow retold the day, whispering back the sounds it had swallowed. Not ghosts, not spirits, just the world finishing its sentence. The man kneels, brushing a gloved hand across the snow. Cold tonight, he says quietly, skies emptying the last of its breath. He points upward. See that? A faint band of brighter light appears near the horizon, moonrise through thinning clouds. The edges glow like frosted silver. The air feels sharp and clean, so still that even speaking feels like disturbing something fragile. The girl takes your hand. Come, she says. I want to show you the snow hill. She leads you behind the house, where drifts have piled into tall, soft slopes. Under the moonlight, they look like glowing dunes in a frozen desert. She kicks a tiny amount of snow with her boot, and the hill produces a small cascading sound. Shh, as the surface shifts. See, she whispers. It answers, and in this moment, you understand something beautiful. Winter can be quiet without being empty, still without being dead, cold without being harsh. There is a softness in this silence, a depth, a kind of conversation between the world and itself. The man joins you, looking out across the fields, now a smooth expanse of white shimmering under the moon. Storm's done, he says. Tomorrow, paths will open again. His voice carries hope and maybe relief. The woman stands behind you on the doorstep, wrapped in her cloak. Her breath forms a little cloud. Good night for rest, she says. Good night for listening. You all stand quietly for a long moment, watching the sky clear, listening to the snow tell its tiny, fragile stories. The girl leans against your side. The man rubs his hands for warmth. The woman hums an old winter tune under her breath, something gentle and familiar. Finally, the cold deepens enough to nudge everyone back inside. The door closes softly, shutting out the freezing air, but letting the moonlit memory linger. Back at the hearth, the fire welcomes you again with open arms. Its warmth feels richer now after the crisp air outside. The woman pulls a thick blanket over the bench and invites you to sit. The girl curls beside you, tucking her feet under the blanket. The cat takes this as an invitation to sit directly on your knee, because of course it does. The man adds another log to the fire. It hisses and sparks. Historians still debate whether winter nights were moments of fear or wonder. But sitting here, wrapped in woven blankets, listening to the fading whispers of the snow and watching firelight dance across the beams, it feels like the answer might be both. And that's exactly what makes them magical. You sink deeper into the warmth. The night deepens quietly around you. And the story moves on. Morning arrives late. Again, if it can be called morning at all. The light outside is a faded silver, diffused through a sky that looks soft enough to touch, but cold enough to regret it. You wake slowly, feeling the faint chill that settled into the house overnight, despite the fire's steady work. The warm stone beside your bedding has cooled, but still holds a whisper of yesterday's heat, like a polite reminder that comfort once existed. The first thing you notice is the window. The frost has drawn on it, not just the usual vague smears of ice, but patterns delicate, branching shapes that look like tiny ferns or feathers pressed against the glass by an invisible hand. The girl is already awake, kneeling on the bench beneath the window, tracing the patterns with a mittened finger without touching them. Look, she whispers to you, eyes wide. The frost garden. The woman joins her, tying her hair back with a strip of cloth. Cold night, she says softly. Frost spirits were busy. She winks. You can't tell if she's humoring the girl or inviting you to believe in something quietly beautiful. A major historical fact settles like a soft weight. Medieval people often saw frost patterns as messages, omens, blessings, warnings, or simply winter's own artwork. Before glass was common, frost appeared on shutters or oiled parchment window coverings, and people read meaning into the swirling shapes the way we might read clouds. The woman points to a branching fan shape. "That one means clear skies," she says. The man, passing by while pulling on his boots, snorts. "Or it means we didn't sleep close enough to the fire," the girl insists. "It's a sign," with the absolute confidence of a child whose worldview is held together by wonder. You study the frost more closely. Each branch is precise, crystalline, and impossibly delicate. As you watch, a tiny flake forms at the edge of one pattern right before your eyes, like winter adding final brushstroke. Your obscure cultural tidbit arrives quietly. In some regions, people believed frost patterns were created not by weather, but by wandering winter spirits tracing paths with their fingers. Sometimes they were thought to bring messages. Sometimes they were said to be playful. And sometimes, if the patterns were particularly elaborate, villagers left small offerings of breadcrumbs or herbs on the windowsill as thanks. The girl does exactly that, placing a single crumb of last night's bread on the sill with great ceremony. The woman shakes her head with amusement but lets it be. The man heads outside to check the weather, leaving the door slightly ajar. Cold air rushes in like an enthusiastic dog. The girl squeaks and dives under a blanket. The woman closes the door halfway to preserve warmth but still peeks out. "Sky's clearing," she says. "Good day for chores." This statement, you've learned, is code for every day is a good day for chores, because winter has an infinite supply. The man returns, brushing snow from his beard. "Frost's thick on everything," he says. Woodpile froze together again. He sits near the fire to warm his hands. The woman hands him a steaming cup of weak ale, and he drinks it gratefully. You finish studying the frost garden and join them near the hearth. The cat chooses your lap as its throne. The girl sits beside you, leaning her head on your arm as though you've been part of the household for years instead of days. The morning chores begin with thawing what can be thawed. The woman sets a pot of water near the fire to warm. The man takes a small hammer and begins tapping apart the woodpile outside, breaking the pieces free with rhythmic knocks that echo faintly through the village. You help sort the logs he brings in, stacking them neatly beside the hearth. The wood surface is icy to the touch, but inside, it still holds the faint memory of last summer's sunlight. The girl helps the prefect. The woman checked the drying herbs, rosemary, thyme, marjoram, all crisp and fragrant in the warm indoor air. She sorts them into small cloth bags, tying each with a bit of twine. "For cooking," she says proudly. "And for colds." The woman nods. "And for flavor," she adds. The girl looks skeptical but accepts it. You step outside with the man to fetch snow for water. The moment you leave the door, your breath freezes into a tiny cloud that drifts upward and dissolves. The frost on the ground sparkles like scattered diamonds. Even the trees look different, each branch edged in white, like nature decided to practice embroidery. As you shovel snow into a bucket, you hear a thin crrrr from somewhere nearby, a frozen branch shifting under its own weight. The sound vibrates through the still air like an instrument tuning itself. "Cold like this," the man says quietly. "You've got to watch the roofs." He glances upward. Frost clings to the thatch, shimmering. The sunlight, or what passes for it, catches on the white edges. "Not too heavy yet," he says. "We'll check again by midday." When you bring the snow indoors, it instantly begins melting in the warm air. Droplets run down the sides of the bucket. The woman hands you a wooden ladle to stir it. "Helps it melt quicker," she explains. The girl nods seriously, as if this is sacred wisdom passed down through generations. The man re-enters, brushing frost from his eyebrows. "Neighbors well froze," he says. "We'll help later." The woman nods. "We'll bring tools." This village's strength isn't loud or heroic, it's quiet, steady, shared. Historians still debate whether medieval communities were truly as cooperative as romantic stories claim, or whether winter simply forced people into alliances of necessity. But watching this family, this village, this careful, interwoven rhythm, it feels true. You sit back down by the window. The frost patterns glimmer in, the soft grey light. The girl joins you, leaning her forehead gently against the cold glass. "It's like the winter drew maps for us," she whispers. You look at the swirling crystalline branches, the delicate lines, the tiny patterns that seem almost intentional. Maybe they are maps. Maps of cold nights survived, maps of warm houses lit by fire, maps of stories told and bread shared. Maps of winter itself not as an enemy, but as a teacher. You take a slow breath, letting the cold and warmth mingle in your chest, and as the frost slowly fades into the morning light, the story continues. The frost garden slowly fades as the fire warms the house, its delicate patterns retreating into a gentle blur. The girl sighs dramatically when the last spiral softens. "They never stay," she murmurs. The woman kisses the top of her head. "Nothing in winter stays," she says, "except the work." And as if summoned by that universal truth, a sharp knock comes at the door. The man opens it, letting a cold gust curl into the room like an uninvited guest. A neighbor stands outside, bundled in wool, beard frosted, cheeks pink from the air. "Our well froze solid," he says, rubbing his hands together. "Need help breaking the ice?" The man nods immediately. "We'll come." No hesitation, no debate. You realize that helping isn't considered generosity. It's considered survival, shared across homes like a communal obligation. The woman hands the man a long iron rod, worn smooth by years of winter use. She gives you the second one. "Hold it tight," she warns. "Ice can bite back." The girl wraps a scarf around your neck with surprising force, as though preparing you for a dangerous expedition. The cat watches this with utter disinterest. You step outside into the crisp cold. The world glows again under a silver sky, bright, quiet, and edged with frost so fine it looks painted. Snow clings to roofs in thick drifts. Footpaths snake between houses, carved out by careful steps in the morning light. As you walk toward the neighbor's well, the crunch under your boots echoes in the stillness. The air feels sharp in your lungs, but your cloak holds warmth better than yesterday. You're learning just slowly, one frozen error at a time. The well stands near a small clearing, a circle of stones rising from the snow. The bucket rope hangs stiff, frozen mid-sway like it was caught trying to escape the cold. A thin crust of ice covers the top layer of water inside. The neighbor kneels beside it, frustrated but patient. "Tried breaking it earlier," he mutters. Ice grew back thicker. The man hands him one of the rods. "We'll break it together." He looks at you. You take the first strike. You blink. "Me?" He nods. "You're learning winter. Best way is doing." You grip the rod, feeling the cold metal sting your palms through your gloves. You position the tip above the ice. The girl watches with wide, anticipatory eyes. You strike. The rod pierces the ice with a sharp, satisfying crack. A thin web of fractures spreads instantly across the surface like new frost patterns forming in reverse. A tiny plume of cold mist rises. The girl claps. The man gives a small, approving grunt, the medieval equivalent of a thumbs up. One major historical fact reveals itself in this moment. Medieval wells often froze, especially shallow ones, and families sometimes spent hours each day breaking the surface ice just to reach liquid water. There were no shortcuts, no salt to scatter, no modern insulation, just iron rods, shared labor, and practiced efficiency. The man takes the next strike, breaking the ice collapse into chunks. The neighbor removes each shard with a wooden ladle, tossing them aside, where they clatter onto the snow like dull pieces of crystal. The rhythm becomes oddly soothing. Strike, crack, scoop, toss, winter percussion. As you work, your obscure cultural tidbit arrives. In some villages, people believed wells held not only water, but also winter spirits who needed to be awakened with noise. Loud banging at dawn was said to tell the well to stay alive. Whether this was superstition or simply early morning frustration disguised as ritual, historians still debate. After several minutes, the well reveals a deep pool of dark, cold water beneath the broken ice. Steam rises faintly from its surface, the illusion of warmth caused by the temperature difference between air and water. The neighbor fills his bucket, relief softening his features. "Thank you," he says simply. But the man shakes his head. "You'll help us when ours freezes." The neighbor nods. "Always. It's not a trade. It's a pattern, a rhythm, a winter promise." As you walk back toward the house, the cold air stings your cheeks, but feels less hostile now, like it respects you a little for not immediately giving up. The man walks beside you in companionable silence. "You struck well," he says. You feel oddly proud. Back inside, warmth wraps around you like a soft blanket. The woman hands you a small wooden cup of warm water, infused with herbs. The girl leans close. "Did you break the ice?" she asks, already knowing the answer. You nod. She gasps in admiration, as though you've just defeated a winter monster. The cat sniffs your boots, decides they smell unacceptable, and turns away. The woman stirs the pot on the hearth. "Storm's truly past," she says. "Sky's clearing more." She lifts the lid of the pot. Steam rises, carrying the scent of onions, barley, and something smoky. The man removes his gloves, rubbing warmth back into his fingers. "Paths might open by evening," he says. "If the sky holds." You hear the faintest creak of settling snow outside, a reminder that the world is still rearranging itself after the storm's exit. Everyone returns to their tasks. The woman needs a new batch of dough. The man sharpens another tool. The girl adds berries to her treasure box. The cat resumes, pretending it owns the hearth. You sit beside the fire again, your muscles warming, your breath steady, your hands still tingling faintly from the iron rod. Historians still debate whether winter shaped medieval communities more than war or famine. But as you watch this family work together, check on neighbors, share tools, share burdens, you suspect the answer is yes. Winter teaches you to rely, to notice, to help, to be helped. You exhale slowly, feeling the warmth settle deep into your chest, mingling with the memory of ice cracking beneath your hands. And as the frost outside loosens its grip under the quiet rising light, the story continues. The day stretches on in its quiet winter rhythm, and after the well is rescued from its icy captivity, the village settles into that delicate balance between rest and readiness. The sky, for the first time in what feels like forever, shows a faint hint of brightness, not quite sunlight, but something pale and promising, like the early draft of a sunrise. You sit by the window, sipping warm water infused with herbs. The cat has finally accepted you as a heat source and drapes itself across your lap with unapologetic entitlement. The girl sits beside you, making tiny holes in the frost-softened patterns with her fingertip. Carefully supervised mischief. The woman hangs a bundle of dried nettles near the hearth. The man steps outside for a moment, and when he returns, he says something shocking. "It's warming." You blink. Warming is a generous term, given that the air still feels like it was personally trained by Arctic wolves. But to medieval villagers, even a shift of a few degrees is newsworthy. The woman leans out the door and inhales thoughtfully. "Cold's easing," she agrees. "Smells different." You sniff the air too. It smells like snow, cold, damp wool, but also something faintly earthy beneath it all, like the ground remembering its existence. The man gestures for you to follow. "Come," he says. "You should see the stream." You bundle into your cloak and step outside. The air is still sharply cold, but no longer biting. The snow underfoot feels heavier, wetter, shifting beneath your boots instead of crunching crisply. The sky is a pale pearl color, the clouds thinning in places, letting weak light filter through. Together, you walk toward the small bridge where the stream runs. The girl trails beside you, hopping from one bootprint to the next. The woman stays behind to tend the house, humming, her winter song under her breath. As you approach the bridge, you hear something unexpected, a soft, inconsistent drip, drip, drip. It's the sound of melting, the sound of winter loosening one button of its heavy coat. The man nods toward the stream. "Hear that?" First thaw, and there it is. The water is moving again. Only slightly, only in small ribbons beneath thin plates of ice. But it moves. A fragile sound, as if the whole landscape is sighing awake. One major historical fact presents itself effortlessly. In medieval villages, the first thaw wasn't just a weather shift, it was a psychological shift. A hint of spring months before spring existed, a small promise that the world hadn't forgotten warmth. The girl kneels by the bank, poking a stick toward the icy edge, with the bold confidence of someone who has never fallen into anything unpleasant. "See?" she exclaims. "The stream is alive again." She says it like she personally revived it. You stand on the topje, little wooden bridge, and watch the faint water movement below. The ice above it creaks occasionally, a delicate sound, brittle and hollow. Small bits break off and drift downstream. The girl gasps every time an ice chunk wobbles, as though witnessing thrilling drama. Your obscure cultural tidbit arrives here with gentle timing. In some medieval communities, people believed that when the stream began moving again, it carried away the old cold, the stale winter air trapped in the village. Children would sometimes whisper wishes into the first moving water, hoping spring would hear them. The girl does exactly this, leaning close and murmuring something you can't quite hear. The man smiles faintly. Good tradition, he says, even if it doesn't do anything. You can tell part of him thinks it might. As you stand listening, the sky brightens even more, and for a few heartbeats, a patch of pale sun pushes through the clouds. It doesn't reach you directly, but it illuminates the snow, turning it almost silver. The girl shields her eyes dramatically. The sun is shy today, she declares. The man chuckles. If the sun's shy, it learned from you. She protests loudly, proving she is not shy at all. You begin the walk back toward the village. The snow gives slightly with each step, softening, compacting. The air carries a faint dripping sound from roofs, gutters, tree branches. Everywhere, tiny droplets fall, like delicate punctuation marks. The man stops suddenly, frowning at a fence post. You follow his gaze and see the wooden peg has cracked in the cold. He examines it closely. We'll fix it before dusk, he says. Thor weakens wood. He gestures at the village around you. Cold preserves, warmth breaks. And here, the winter logic flips. Thawing may be hopeful, but it also reveals weaknesses hidden under the freeze. Back inside the house, the warmth greets you like an old friend. The woman has hung a damp cloth near the fire. The snow melting in the bucket has left droplets everywhere. She glances at the girl. Did you make your wish? The girl nods proudly. I wished for more bread. The woman laughs. A practical wish. The man nods. Smartest one of the season. You sit beside the hearth as the man brings in the cracked fence peg for repair. He uses a small knife to shave the edges, then binds it with a strip of leather. The girl helps by holding the leather taut, tongue poking out in concentration. The woman adds spruce resin to the seam to seal it. The cat supervises, doing nothing helpful. Historians still debate whether medieval winters bred pessimism or patience. But inside this small home, among these steady hands and warm voices, the answer feels clear. Winter bred resilience, and a quiet, persistent sense of hope. As the afternoon dims, the girl climbs onto your knee and opens her treasure box again. Want to see something? She asks. Inside is the tiny polished stone she showed you days ago, round, smooth, warm, even in winter air. It looks like the sun, she says softly, so we can remember. You hold the stone between your fingers. It glows faintly in the firelight, reflecting an ember's glow. The man glances out the window. Tomorrow will be cold again, he says. But the thaw began. That's what matters. The woman nods, stirring the pot. Winter never leaves all at once. It leaves in whispers. You feel the truth of that as the fire crackles and the snow outside drips and freezes in quiet cycles. Today was a whisper, and with dusk settling gently over the village once more, the story moves toward its final, quiet arc. Evening gathers slowly, wrapping itself around the village like a heavy wool cloak. The faint warmth from the earlier thaw has already slipped away, replaced by a returning crispness that settles on rooftops and fence posts in thin, glittering layers. But everything feels slightly different, now subtle, like the air is holding a secret. It's not quite ready to share. Inside the house, you feel it too. The fire burns steady, the room glows with a warm amber haze, and the family moves with an ease earned over long winter days. The girl hums while sorting her treasures for the 1,000th time. The woman kneads a small evening portion of dough. The man sharpens his knife with slow, careful strokes. Even the cat looks slightly more relaxed, as though it alone has sensed the coming shift in seasons. Your hands are still warm from holding the girl's sun-like stone as you sit near the hearth. Outside the window, the frost tries once more to shape delicate trails along the glass. But tonight, the patterns are thinner, as if winter's hand has grown tired. The woman glances at the window and smiles gently. Frost's light tonight, she says, means the cold's losing its certainty. A poetic way of saying, spring may eventually remember to visit. You step outside, with the family one last time to bring in the evening's firewood. The snow crunches beneath your boots, not the brittle crunch of deep freeze, but a softer sound, like sugar being pressed under a spoon. Your breath still fogs in the air, but the wind is calm, almost contemplative. Above you, the clouds have parted just enough to show a ribbon of night sky, the darkest blue you've seen yet, deep and serene. A few stars shimmer faintly, flickering behind thin patches of cloud like distant lanterns carried by quiet travelers. One major historical fact settles into this peaceful moment. Medieval villages often marked the turning point of winter, not by temperature, but by the quality of light. How the sky looked at dusk, how the snow reflected moonrise, how long the shadows stretched across the frozen ground. Light was a calendar, long before printed calendars existed. As you walk back toward the house, the man pauses, scanning the horizon. "Smells like a clear night," he murmurs, and indeed, the air holds a faint scent of wood smoke and something crisp, almost metallic, that signals stable weather ahead. The girl tugs your cloak. "Come inside," she whispers. "It's warm." Back in the house, you share a simple evening meal, a bit of bread, a ladle of stew, a handful of dried berries, the kind of meal that tastes richer because of the day woven into it. The woman offers you the last piece of the warm loaf from earlier. "You've earned it," she says softly. The man leans back, stretching his shoulders. "You've taken to winter well," he tells you. Not everyone does. You feel a quiet warmth at his approval, warmth that has nothing to do with the fire. Your obscure cultural tidbit arrives here at the heart of evening. In some medieval villages, the final stretch of winter was called the listening weeks, when people paid close attention to the world, waiting for the first migrating birds, the soft drip of thawing icicles, the shift in wind direction. They believed the world sent signs before changing. Tonight feels like one of those signs. As you settle beside the hearth for the night, the girl curls up next to you, wrapped in a wool blanket. The woman dims the fire just slightly, banking the embers so they last until dawn. The man checks the shutters one last time before sitting down with a satisfied sigh. Historians still debate whether the final weeks of winter were the hardest or the most hopeful. But here, in this quiet home, surrounded by warmth, kindness, and the steady hum of survival, it feels like both hard enough to respect, hopeful enough to keep going. You rest your hand on the woven mat beside you. The fire crackles softly. The girl breathes slow and even. The cat curls into a perfect, purring circle. Outside, winter holds the village in a peaceful pause. Inside, you feel the season turning slowly, gently, like a wheel beginning its upward lift. And with the last logs of the evening glowing in the point, a hearth. The story exhales. The room grows quieter as the night deepens, each sound smoothing itself into softer edges. The fire settles into a slow, steady glow, its embers shimmering like tiny red stars resting close to the floor. Shadows stretch lazily along the walls, blending into one another with the drowsy confidence of old companions. The air is warm now, drifting gently across your skin, easing tension from your shoulders, softening the weight in your chest. You breathe in deeply, letting the warmth fill you. The winter cold outside stays where it belongs, and in its place you feel only comfort, quiet, steady, unhurried. The girl beside you shifts slightly in her sleep, her small hand resting against your arm, and even that tiny touch feels grounding, reassuring. The woman hums a faint melody near the fire as she finishes her last small task of the night. The man sits on the bench, boots off, hands folded, watching the fire with half-closed eyes. Everyone sinks into the shared softness of evening. You listen to the slow rhythm of the house fire settling, wood popping lightly, someone's breath deepening as they drift closer to sleep. Outside the window, a faint breeze brushes the frost-softened glass. The world feels still, as though winter itself has paused to rest along with you. Snow lies unmoving across the village, smooth and untouched, reflecting the dim glow of the sky in a calm, muted shimmer. You feel yourself loosening into this moment, into the safety, the warmth, the gentle sense that nothing is required of you now. The day's work is finished. Tomorrow can wait. For now, there is only breath and warmth, and the slow comfort of being held by a quiet night. Let your thoughts drift, let your body soften, let the warmth settle around you, and rest,